The little girl was blue, not the soft, inviting cerulean of a summer sky, nor the deep sapphire of a holiday dress. This was the terrifying, sickly, washed-out blue of hypothermia, the hue a body takes on when the heart is slowing and the life force is retreating, having been brutally frozen for what must have been hours too long. She lay miserably curled inside a massive cardboard box, likely meant for a refrigerator, shoved tight against the rank-smelling steel dumpster behind Romano's diner. Her small frame shook so violently that the rhythmic chattering of her teeth, hard, sharp, clicking sounds, became a haunting rhythm, a sound Sophia Bennett would carry with her into nightmares for years to come. Sophia, running on pure adrenaline and sheer fatigue, nearly walked right past her. She had just survived a brutal double shift, 16 unrelenting hours on her feet, hauling heavy plates of subpar pasta and greasy pizza to customers who treated her like an inconvenient appliance, never even bothering to meet her eye. Her lower back was seizing up. Her legs throbbed with a dull, insistent ache. All she craved was the blessed oblivion of home. A scalding hot shower to melt the fatigue away, followed by total collapse into her narrow bed. She opted for the back exit. It shaved precious seconds off her commute. Pushing through the weighted, heavy metal door, the sound of it clanging shut swallowed instantly by the frozen air. She stepped out into the savage, brutal February night of Chicago. The cold immediately hit her lungs like physical blows. It was then that the faint, unnatural sound halted her dead in her tracks. Initially, she dismissed it. The alley behind Romano's was a regular haunt for a few mangy strays she occasionally slipped leftovers to. But this sound lacked the raw, demanding yowl of a hungry animal. It was too soft, too broken, the weak, exhausted moan of something desperately human. Sophia's worn sneakers crunched loudly against the frozen, grit-covered asphalt as she moved cautiously toward the dumpster. The lonely yellow street lamp at the alley's edge threw insufficient, fractured light, but enough for her to locate the enormous, discarded box. It was the type used for shipping large appliances. A refrigerator, maybe, and someone had deliberately wedged it tight against the grimy brick wall of the neighboring building. She forced herself to look inside. The little girl could not have been older than 5, perhaps even younger. She was dressed in a flimsy cotton shift, a dress that might once have possessed a cheerful pink color but was now stiff and irrevocably stained gray with filth and dust. No coat, no socks, no shoes, just that meager, dirty garment and a tattered, stuffed rabbit, a pathetic, torn thing, clutched fiercely to her chest. Her jet-black curls were matted and tangled into a wild, uncared-for mess. Her face was streaked with the combined trails of tears and grime. But it was her eyes that instantly shattered Sophia's resolve. Those warm, intelligent brown eyes were wide, staring up at Sophia with a look that contained both pure, blinding terror and a strange, fatalistic sense of surrender, as if she had already accepted that no one in this cold world was ever coming to save her. "Oh God!" Sophia breathed, the sound lost in the vastness of the cold, her own heart suddenly hammering in her ribs. Without a second thought, she shrugged off her own warmth. The bright red pea coat, a treasured heirloom given to her by her beloved grandmother before she passed, and carefully wrapped the heavy wool around the trembling, fragile child. The girl offered no resistance. She didn't speak. She simply continued to shake uncontrollably, her small body going startlingly limp as Sophia gently scooped her out of the makeshift grave of the cardboard box. "It's okay, sweetheart," Sophia murmured, even though her own voice was shaking with shock and fear. "I have you now. You are safe." The little girl was so tragically light, almost weightless. Sophia could feel the distinct ridge of every tiny rib through the thin, threadbare fabric of the dress. How long had she been out here? How long had she been abandoned? Sophia scanned the dark, silent alley, searching for any flicker of movement, any sign of the monstrous person who had left this child to freeze to death. But the alley was utterly empty. The windows of the surrounding buildings were dark, blind squares. No one was watching. No one had seen. Someone had thrown this little girl away like a piece of worthless trash. If the child had been discovered only a few hours later, she wouldn't have survived the night. What kind of monster could abandon a 5-year-old in the bone-deep, murderous cold of Chicago like this? If only Sophia had known. As she cradled the featherlight body against her own cold chest, she was utterly unaware that the trembling little girl in her arms was the single most sought-after person in all of Chicago, the missing daughter of the city's most infamous, feared mafia boss. A man who had systematically turned the entire ruthless criminal underworld inside out for 5 agonizing years just to find this child. Sophia did not take the easy route home. She took the necessary one. Rejecting her original plan, she carried the child the 6 long blocks toward her cramped apartment, holding the small bundle tight against her chest, desperately trying to share the last meager scraps of warmth left in her own weary body. The child never uttered a single word. There were no tears, no cries. She only clung to Sophia's neck, her small fingers stiff and cold against Sophia's skin, and stared straight ahead with those wide, haunted brown eyes. The building where Sophia lived was old, neglected, and slowly collapsing, but inside, at least, it offered shelter and relative warmth. She struggled up 4 flights of creaking stairs, fumbling with her key in the lock while trying desperately not to drop the child. The door stuck, as it always did, forcing her to kick it twice with the heel of her sneaker before it finally yielded. Her apartment was tiny, a cramped studio where the bed occupied one corner and the miniature kitchen another. The walls were painted a pale, optimistic yellow, a task she had completed 3 years prior, attempting to inject some warmth into a space that perpetually smelled faintly of damp and age. A worn, faded blue sofa, scavenged from a thrift store, sat against the wall, and a small table with 2 chairs served double duty for eating and for the extra sewing work she took on to supplement her meager wages. Sophia set the little girl down gently on the mattress, then rushed to plug in the wheezing old space heater in the corner. The machine immediately began to hum loudly, and a meager wave of warm air slowly began to spread. She turned back to the child. The little girl still sat perfectly still, both arms wrapped tightly around the torn, stuffed rabbit, guarding it as if it were the last tangible link to her existence. Her large brown eyes tracked Sophia's every movement with the weary, guarded attention of a wild animal that had learned the limits of human cruelty too well. She was still shaking. Her entire body trembled without ceasing. Though the room was already beginning to warm, Sophia understood instantly that this was not merely the cold of the weather. This was the deep, insidious cold that had seeped into bone, into soul, the cold of profound abandonment. Sophia sat down gently on the edge of the mattress, moving slowly, trying not to disturb the fragile calm, careful not to frighten her. She spoke softly, her voice barely a murmur. "Sweetheart, I need to take this dirty dress off you. Okay? I'm going to find you something warm and clean to wear." The little girl remained unresponsive, watching Sophia with vacant eyes that seemed to hold the weight of 100 years. Sophia slowly reached out to lift the gray, filthy fabric. As she gently pulled the dress over the child's head, the sight that greeted her made her breath hitch painfully in her throat. Beneath the threadbare material, the small, bony body was a roadmap of violence. It was covered in bruises. Some had already begun to fade to a sick, greenish yellow. Others were terrifyingly fresh, dark, angry purple blooms marring her arms, her back, her small thighs. Far too many bruises for a child of 5. Far too much pain for such a tiny life. Sophia had to momentarily turn her face away, swallowing down the nausea and the sudden, fierce sting of tears, determined not to let the child see her own distress. When she looked back, her gaze caught on something peculiar. Tucked just behind the little girl's right ear, partially obscured by the matted black curls, was a birthmark. It possessed a highly unusual shape, clearly defined. A miniature crescent moon, reddish-brown against the skin that was still unnaturally pale blue from the cold. Sophia had never witnessed a birthmark with such stark, perfect precision. Its edges were sharp, unnaturally distinct, as if some cosmic hand had perfectly etched the symbol onto the girl's delicate skin. Sophia gently brushed the tangled hair away from the child's face. "Can you tell me your name?" No answer. The little girl only hugged the stuffed rabbit tighter, her small fingers squeezing the fabric so hard her knuckles turned white. Sophia did not press her. She stood and went to the small closet, finding an old t-shirt, the softest one she owned, a gentle shade of green. She pulled it over the little girl's head, and it fell past her knees like an oversized nightgown. At least now she had something clean and warm against her skin. Sophia looked down at the child, at the bruises, at the unique crescent birthmark, at the brown eyes that had witnessed more suffering than one should encounter in 5 lifetimes, let alone 5 short years. Sophia had no idea who this child was. She did not know who had inflicted this unimaginable cruelty. But she knew one thing for certain, with an iron resolve hardening in her chest. She would not let anyone hurt her ever again. Sophia took the child into the tiny bathroom, a confined space dominated by an ancient, time-stained bathtub. But the water still ran hot, and she carefully tested the flow with her elbow, just as her grandmother had meticulously taught her decades ago. It had to be perfect. Not scalding, not cool, but just warm enough to gently begin driving away the relentless chill that had permeated the girl's small bones. The girl stood stock still, watching Sophia prepare everything, the torn, stuffed rabbit still held tightly against her chest. When Sophia finally helped her step into the water, the child drew a sharp, involuntary gasp as the warmth contacted her frozen skin. Then, almost imperceptibly, the rigidity began to ease. Her thin shoulders dropped an infinitesimal amount. The fingers clenched around the rabbit relaxed slightly. Sophia used a soft cloth to wash the girl's skin, careful to avoid the worst of the bruised areas. She dared not scrub hard, fearful of causing additional pain. Layer after layer of dirt and alley grime began to rinse away, revealing pale skin beneath, still faintly tinged blue from the cold exposure. As Sophia's hands worked, her mind drifted back to the past. She thought of her grandmother, the strong, quiet woman who had raised her after Sophia's parents were killed in a sudden car accident. Sophia was only 8 when it happened. She remembered crying inconsolably night after night, her grandmother holding her close in arms that were thin but strong and intensely warm. Her grandmother rarely offered trite condolences. She simply held Sophia and let her weep until the tears were utterly spent. Then one night, when Sophia, small and confused, asked why she had taken her in despite being old and having very little money, her grandmother had smiled a gentle, unforgettable smile. "Love is not something you receive, my child. Love is something you give. And when you give love freely, somehow you always end up receiving more than you gave." Sophia hadn't understood those words fully when she was small. But now, looking down at the silent child in her bathtub, she was beginning to. She didn't have much to give. She was just a waitress, living in a miserable apartment with a nearly empty bank account. But she could give this child one warm, safe night. She could offer sanctuary, even if only for a brief time, and perhaps that was exactly what this child needed most right now. After the bath, Sophia wrapped the little girl in the warmest, thickest towel she owned and carried her out. The girl's skin now had a little more natural color, no longer that terrifying washed-out blue of the alley. Sophia redressed her in the soft green t-shirt and sat her on the bed, tucking a second blanket securely around her. Then she went into the kitchen and opened the worn refrigerator. The contents were sparse. A few pale eggs, some wilted vegetables, and a small container of leftover chicken. She pulled out the chicken and began crafting a simple porridge, adding a pinch of salt and a sliver of onion, letting it simmer on the low flame until the faint, comforting aroma permeated the small apartment. When she presented the bowl to the little girl, those large brown eyes locked onto the food with an undeniable, fierce hunger that the child could not mask. She ate with heartbreaking caution, spoon by painstaking spoon, as though terrified that if she moved too quickly, the meal would be cruelly snatched away. Sophia sat watching her, her heart contracting painfully. This was not the way a child ate. This was the mechanical, guarded consumption of someone who had been starved. Someone who genuinely did not know when or if the next meal would ever appear. After the little girl finished, Sophia cleaned up and prepared for sleep. She planned to retreat to the hard, old sofa to give the child the comfort of the entire bed. But as she stood up, a small, cold hand clamped onto her sleeve. Sophia looked down. The little girl was staring up at her, eyes pleading, and for the first time Sophia witnessed a different kind of terror. Not the fear of the belt or the fist, but the deep, bone-deep fear of being utterly abandoned again. Sophia understood instantly. She eased herself back down onto the bed, lying beside the child. She did not immediately hold her, afraid of startling her, but positioning herself close enough so that the girl would know, without a doubt, that she was still present. The little girl immediately curled her body against Sophia's side, the stuffed rabbit wedged securely between them. Sophia closed her eyes, trying to force sleep even as her mind spun with 1,000 frantic questions. Who are you? Who did this to you? Why were you left in that alley? She didn't know how much time passed before she heard a small sound. A whisper so quiet she almost missed it. Sophia opened her eyes slowly and turned her head. In the dim, ambient darkness of the room, she saw the little girl's small lips moving, talking quietly to the stuffed rabbit. Weak whispers reached Sophia's ears. Bun Bun. Will she leave us? She will leave us like the others, right? Sophia stayed motionless, pretending to sleep, but it felt as though someone was physically squeezing her heart until it ached. How many times had this child been abandoned to be this afraid? What horrors had she endured in 5 short years to speak those desolate words to a rag doll? Sophia did not answer. She didn't want the girl to know she had heard the secret exchange. But in the dark, she made herself a solemn promise. She would not abandon her. No matter what came next, she would not let this child be alone again. The muted, dull gray light of a Chicago winter morning seeped reluctantly through the thin, old curtains. Sophia woke slowly, feeling the immediate, comforting warmth of the small body nestled tightly beside her. The little girl was still deep in sleep, tiny fingers fiercely gripping the stuffed rabbit. Her face, at last, far more serene than the terror she had worn the night before. Sophia carefully began to ease herself out of the bed, determined not to wake the child. She desperately needed strong coffee to clear the fog from her mind and begin organizing the impossible task ahead. She had barely planted her feet on the cold floor when a sound ripped through the fragile morning silence. A high, raw, animalistic scream. Sophia whirled around. The little girl was sitting bolt upright, brown eyes wide, panic-stricken. She frantically scanned the small room, breathing in shallow, terrified gasps, like a wild creature suddenly cornered. When her eyes failed to locate Sophia immediately, her entire body began to shake anew, choked sobs clawing their way out of her throat. Sophia rushed back to the bed. I'm right here, sweetheart. You're safe. She sat down, careful not to initiate contact, fearing she might exacerbate the fear. But the little girl solved the dilemma for her, lunging forward, wrapping small arms tight around Sophia's waist as if convinced Sophia would dissolve the instant she loosened her grip. And then, for the first time, the little girl spoke. Don't go. The voice was reedy, trembling, so faint Sophia had to lean in to catch the sound. But they were real words, a desperate, articulate plea from a child who had remained stubbornly silent through the entire ordeal. Don't go. Don't leave me. Sophia felt tears stinging her eyes. She wrapped her arms around the girl, this time holding her tight, letting her feel the absolute certainty that Sophia was not going anywhere. I will not leave you. I promise I will stay right here with you. They stayed like that for a long time, until the girl's breathing slowly steadied and the terrible trembling finally eased. Sophia knew she couldn't handle this alone. She was not a doctor. She had no idea how profound the hypothermia damage was, how serious the internal injuries might be, or what care the bruises required. She needed professional training, and she knew precisely where to find it. Maggie O'Brien, the 68-year-old widow who occupied the apartment right next door, was the only family Sophia had left since her grandmother died. Maggie's silver hair was always pinned back in a perfect bun, and her bright blue eyes were still remarkably sharp after 40 years spent as a seasoned nurse before her retirement. Sophia carried the little girl, who clung to her like a small koala, refusing to release her grip even for a second, to Maggie's apartment. When Maggie opened the door and saw them, her sharp blue eyes widened in immediate shock. Sophia quickly recounted the story of the previous night. The cardboard box, the brutal cold, the severely abandoned child. Maggie didn't ask a barrage of questions. She simply nodded and opened the door wide to let them in. Maggie's apartment was intensely warm, filled with decades of collected memories. Photographs covered every available surface, and the air carried a comforting, faint scent of cinnamon and vanilla. The little girl looked around with cautious curiosity, pausing her gaze on a collection of ceramic angels sitting on the windowsill. Maggie led them into the living room and began the examination. She worked gently, meticulously, always speaking in a low, soothing voice so the girl would not be afraid. Sophia sat closely beside them, holding the child's small hand through the entire process. When Maggie finished, she sat across from Sophia, her expression deeply grave, confirming Sophia's worst fears. "She is severely malnourished, Sophia," Maggie stated, her voice tight with professional concern. "From what I can tell, she has not had proper food, not real, nourishing food, for a very long time. Months, perhaps even years. Her ribs are practically exposed. She has almost no muscle mass." Sophia swallowed hard. "And the bruises?" Maggie was silent for a heavy moment. "Those," she stated flatly, "are not accidental. They are not the marks of falling or rough play." Maggie looked Sophia directly in the eye, her gaze unwavering. "This child has been brutally hit. She has been abused, Sophia. I don't know who did this, but this little life has been walking through hell for a long, long time." Sophia closed her eyes, struggling to contain the fierce, protective anger boiling in her chest. She had suspected it since the moment she undressed her, but hearing a professional confirm it still wounded her deeply. Who could do this? Who could beat and starve a 5-year-old child? "You have to call the police," Maggie continued, her tone urgent. "You cannot simply keep her here without notifying authorities. She has family somewhere. Someone might be searching for her. Or if no one is looking, then you need to report the abuse so they can investigate who inflicted this trauma on her." Sophia looked down at the little girl sitting beside her. She was still holding Sophia's hand securely, her brown eyes intently following the conversation, even if she didn't understand every adult word. Bun Bun was tucked under her other arm, like the only protection she had left in this broken world. Sophia knew Maggie was absolutely right. She couldn't hide the child forever. She had to do the right thing, the necessary thing. But when she pictured the police arriving, the questions starting, the terrifying possibility of them taking the girl away, her chest tightened with suffocating pain. She looked into those trusting brown eyes. "All right," Sophia said at last, the words heavy but firm. "I will call the police, but I will not leave her. I will stay with her until I know, absolutely, that she will be safe and okay." The call to the Central Police Department took less than 5 minutes. Yet for Sophia, the waiting that followed felt like an eternity. She sat in her apartment, the little girl tightly curled against her, and she waited. Approximately an hour later, a heavy, measured knock sounded at the door. Sophia opened it to find a middle-aged woman standing outside. She had black hair threaded with silver, meticulously pulled back into a severe bun, and sharp brown eyes that somehow still held a surprising warmth. Her posture was sturdy, radiating the quiet confidence of someone deeply experienced in handling human tragedy. She wore a dark, practical brown leather jacket, and a polished badge was clipped to her chest. "I am Detective Rachel Torres," she said, her voice low, measured, and steady. "You are the one who called in the report about an abandoned child." Sophia nodded and stepped aside to let her in. The instant Torres crossed the threshold, the little girl, sensing the presence of authority, visibly shrank back on the bed. She yanked the thin blanket up until it covered half her face, leaving only those enormous brown eyes staring at the stranger with intense, guarded fear. The stuffed rabbit was squeezed so hard in her arms that the stuffing nearly burst through the seams. Torres noticed the reaction immediately. She did not press the advantage by moving closer. Instead, she slowly lowered herself into a chair placed at a respectful distance from the bed, ensuring she did not tower over the fragile child. "Hello, sweetheart," she said gently, projecting calm. "My name is Rachel. I'm a police officer, and I'm here to help you. The little girl didn't reply. She only looked first at Torres, then quickly back at Sophia, as if seeking silent permission or protection. Sophia sat down beside the child. He gently settled her on the bed and immediately took the small, trembling hand into his. "It is okay," Sophia murmured, her voice soft but firm. "She is a good person. You can talk to her." Unexpectedly, Sophia's steady, comforting presence seemed to draw the child back from the brink of hysteria. She did not release Sophia's hand. It remained her anchor, but the wild panic in her eyes receded, replaced by guarded apprehension. Torres, observant of their quiet connection, watched the way they clung to each other and offered a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval. She pulled out a small, spiral-bound notebook and a pen, shifting into a professional investigative stance. "Can you tell me your name?" Silence stretched taut between the three of them. The little girl looked desperately at Sophia, who squeezed her hand in encouragement and nodded. A tiny, breathy voice finally spoke, almost swallowed by the silence of the room. "Mila, my name is Mila." Torres wrote it down, her movements efficient. "Mila, do you remember where you lived? Before you were in that box?" The little girl shook her head, the black curls bouncing around her face. "I do not remember. I only remember him." "Him?" Torres repeated, leaning in slightly. "Who is he?" The little girl began to tremble uncontrollably at the memory. Sophia instinctively squeezed her hand tighter, offering a silent transfer of strength. That small act of reassurance seemed to grant the child just enough fragile courage to continue. "He wears a black leather jacket," she whispered, her voice tight with terror. "He says Mila's dad is bad. He says nobody wants Mila. He says Mila is useless." The words were simple, stark, and brutal, confirming the psychological abuse the child had endured. Every devastating syllable landed like a serrated knife in Sophia's chest, leaving a deep, burning wound of empathy and protective fury. She felt rage surge through her, hot, blinding, and violent, but she forcibly suppressed it, needing to maintain a shield of calm for Mila. Torres was quiet for a long moment, too. Her professional mask slipped momentarily, her jaw clenched hard, betraying the fierce internal struggle, before she smoothly forced her face back into an expression of detached professionalism. "Mila, can I look at the birthmark behind your ear? Sophia told me about it." The girl hesitated, glancing at Sophia again. Sophia gave another slow, encouraging nod. Torres stood slowly, ensuring every movement was careful and measured so as not to startle the fragile child. She sat gently on the very edge of the bed and tenderly swept the messy black hair away from Mila's right ear. The distinct crescent-shaped birthmark was clearly visible against the pale skin in the daylight. Torres stared at it, and a profound shift occurred in her eyes. They widened suddenly, recognizing something far beyond a simple identifying feature. She took out her personal phone, not her police equipment, and quickly snapped several pictures, her hand trembling in a nervous, almost imperceptible way. When she was finished, Torres stood and quietly guided Sophia toward the corner of the room, speaking in a hushed, low tone so the child, though watching them intently, would not overhear. "Normally in a case like this, we would immediately place the child in a temporary shelter while we investigate. It is standard procedure for safety and documentation." Sophia's heart constricted painfully in her chest. The thought of losing Mila now, after only a few hours, was unbearable. "But she is terrified. I cannot let you take her away from me right now. Please look at her, detective. She trusts me." Torres glanced back at Mila, who was perched on the bed, watching them with huge, worried brown eyes, as if she instinctively understood that her entire fate was being decided in that whispered conference. "I need to run a background check on you, Ms. Bennett," Torres stated, her voice returning to its official timbre. "If everything is entirely clean, I can arrange for you to foster her temporarily while we investigate. But only temporarily, pending the outcome of the case." Sophia nodded instantly, immense relief washing over her. "I understand. Thank you." Torres walked back toward the bed to say a simple goodbye to the little girl. But the moment Torres cautiously mentioned that someone else, a caseworker or a stranger, might come to take her, Mila instantly dissolved into panic. She scrambled off the bed and frantically clung to Sophia's leg, her entire small body shaking, choking sobs tearing out of her. "No, no," she cried, her voice raw with terror. "Do not take me. I want to stay with Sophia. Do not leave me." Sophia immediately dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms tightly around Mila and rocking her gently, trying desperately to soothe the hysterical child. She looked up at Torres with eyes that were utterly desperate and pleading. Torres watched the raw, heart-wrenching scene, and something deep inside her usually sharp, cynical gaze softened entirely. "All right," she conceded, the compromise heavy in her tone. "For now, she can stay here, but I will be back. We will talk logistics later." She stepped out the door, but just before exiting completely, she paused and looked back at Sophia, her expression grave. "That birthmark," she said slowly, articulating each word with careful weight. "A crescent behind the right ear. I have seen it before. I have seen it in a highly sensitive missing person file from 5 years ago." Sophia felt her blood turn instantly cold, chilling her to the bone. "What do you mean?" Torres looked toward the corner where the little girl was still curled tightly in Sophia's arms. "I need to confirm it, but if I am right, this child is not a normal abandoned kid. Someone has been searching, obsessively searching, for her for 5 long, brutal years." The vast conference room on the top floor of the Benedetti estate, a space usually teeming with the low murmur of powerful men and high-stakes deals, was currently silent as a tomb. But Luca Benedetti, the man who commanded that silence, was not there. He was not in the lavish office with its priceless, million-dollar paintings and its massive, intimidating oak desk. He was certainly not in the master bedroom, where the king-size bed had not granted him a single night of true, restful sleep in 5 years. He was instead in a small, seldom-visited room at the end of the hallway on the 2nd floor. The room was painted a soft, gentle powder pink, with white, fluffy clouds meticulously painted across the ceiling. A princess bed, complete with a sheer, white canopy, stood untouched in the corner. A small bookshelf, once overflowing with vibrant picture books and soft toys, sat now under a thin, silvery layer of dust. A large, cuddly teddy bear rested against a small, child-sized armchair, its glass eyes staring blankly into the oppressive nothingness. Everything within the room had been preserved and left exactly as it was 5 years ago, as if the owner of the room had only stepped out for a moment and could return home at any time. Luca sat now in the armchair by the window, the very spot where he used to sit every night and read whimsical bedtime stories to his daughter. In his hand he held a photograph, the edges softened and worn thin from being touched and handled far too many times. The picture showed a 6-month-old baby with a halo of black curls and bright, shining brown eyes that mirrored his wife's. Amelia, his daughter, the child who had been violently ripped from his arms in a single terrifying night he would never, could never, forget. Memory surged over him like a devastating tidal wave. He remembered that night with horrifying clarity. He had been locked in a tense meeting with the family's senior members when his phone vibrated. Grace, the loyal, devoted caretaker, was calling. Her voice had been panicked beyond any reasonable sense. He drove home like a madman, violating every traffic law in existence. When he burst into the nursery, the crib was cold and empty. Grace lay unconscious on the floor, blood seeping from a head wound, and his daughter was gone. 5 years, 1,825 days, 43,800 hours. He had obsessively counted every second, every minute. He had torn all of Chicago inside out, and the surrounding cities with it. He had spent millions of dollars on private investigators, on extensive media campaigns, on any faint, desperate lead that might bring him back to his daughter, and all of it had been completely meaningless. A soft, respectful knock at the door pulled him violently from the crushing current of thought. Dante stepped inside, his younger brother, his most trusted consigliere and right-hand man in the family organization. Dante was 2 years Luca's junior, possessing the same sharp black hair and piercing gray eyes of the Benedetti bloodline. But his face was softer, lacking Luca's etched, hard angles. And in Dante's eyes, Luca saw what he had seen far too many times before: profound disappointment. "Brother," Dante said, his voice heavy with defeat. "The lead in Detroit. It was fake. Just another extortion attempt." Luca did not visibly react. He simply sat there, a statue carved of grief and exhaustion, staring intently at the photograph clutched in his hand. "How many is that now?" he asked, his voice dull, distant, and dangerously low. Dante was silent for a measured moment, counting the emotional toll as much as the numbers. 523. 523 times. 523 times someone had called, claiming falsely to have seen his daughter or to have information. 523 times he had grudgingly allowed himself a sliver of hope. And 523 times that hope had been savagely crushed into meaningless dust. The whiskey glass resting on the small table beside him flew into the white wall before Dante even realized his brother had moved. Glass exploded everywhere, showering the preserved room. Amber liquor ran slowly down the immaculate white wall like dripping blood, a chilling stain against the innocence of the pink. Luca stood there, his hand bleeding freely from a deep cut caused by the shards, but he did not notice or care. He felt no physical pain anymore. The excruciating pain inside had long since swallowed everything else. Dante immediately stepped closer, concerned, but Luca lifted a crimson-stained hand to stop him. He turned back toward the window, staring blankly out at the garden buried under a heavy blanket of white snow. And another memory, equally devastating, crashed down upon him. Catalina, his wife, the undeniable love of his brutal life. She had died 2 years prior. A drunk driver had violently slammed into her car while she was driving home from a support group, a meeting designed specifically for parents of missing children. She went to those meetings every single week, even though Luca repeatedly told her they were useless, even though he begged her to dedicate her focus solely to the investigation instead of sitting with strangers and talking about abstract feelings. She had always said those gatherings helped her keep hope alive, like a fragile, necessary flame. And their last conversation had been a terrible, unforgivable fight about those very meetings. He had said cruel things, accusatory things. He had told her she was wasting precious time. Then she left, and he never got the chance to apologize for the hateful words. He found her in the hospital. Her body was shattered and broken by the crash. She lived just long enough to whisper one last thing. "Find her." She breathed, blood seeping tragically from the corner of her mouth. "Promise me, Luca. Find Amelia. Bring our baby home." Those were Catalina's final, agonizing words, and they became the sacred, impossible curse Luca would carry to his grave. He had promised, and he would keep that promise even if he had to dismantle the entire world to do it. The sharp vibration of a ringing phone abruptly shattered the sterile silence. Luca looked down at the screen. An unknown number, displayed simply as a string of digits. He almost let it go, convinced it was just another scammer, another opportunist trying to make money off his eternal grief. But something, a desperate, raw intuition, made him pick up. "Mr. Benedetti." A crisp woman's voice came through the line, professional and unhurried. "This is Detective Rachel Torres with the Chicago Police Department." Luca said nothing, his breath catching in his throat. He had heard far too many calls exactly like this one. "I know you have received many calls like this," Torres continued, cutting through his cynicism. "And I know you have absolutely no reason to believe me, but I need you to come to the station right now. We may have found your daughter." Luca did not remember how he drove to the police station. He only registered the deafening roar of the engine, the frantic blare of horns as he ran a series of red lights, and Dante yelling frantically from the passenger seat, imploring him to slow down before he killed them both in a useless, fiery crash. But Luca could not slow down. Not now. Not after 5 years of living in a purgatory of waiting. The black sports car tore through the Chicago streets like a ballistic missile, leaving behind only the cacophony of angry horns and harsh, flashing headlights. Luca gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white and strained. His jaw was locked tight, his gray eyes glued fixedly to the road ahead. In his head, there was only one, singular, pounding thought. His daughter, Amelia. She might have finally been found. Dante sat rigidly beside him, one hand gripping the door handle for stability, the other resting firmly on his brother's shoulder, a mix of restraint and support. "Brother," Dante repeated, his voice tense but struggling to maintain a steady, calming tone. "You have to calm down. If you die on the way there, what good will any of this be?" Luca did not answer. He knew Dante was right, logically, but he had lost all control over his physical body. His heart was hammering wildly in his chest like a frantic war drum. His blood felt like it was boiling in his veins. 5 years. 5 years he had existed in hell. 5 years he had searched without a single moment of rest. And now, perhaps, just perhaps, the nightmare was finally about to end. Catalina came rushing back into his mind, vivid and sharp. He remembered the day they first met at a sprawling family party. She had no idea who he was. She knew nothing of the dark underworld empire the Benedetti family controlled. She only saw a lonely, imposing man standing by himself in a corner, and she, with her characteristic fearlessness, had walked over and started a conversation. She became the single, essential light in his vast, self-imposed darkness. When he eventually told her the brutal truth about his family, he had steeled himself for her immediate departure, but she had stayed. She said she loved the man he was, not the crushing name he carried. Then Amelia was born. A tiny, perfect girl with her mother's warm brown eyes and her father's defiant black curls. 6 short months of intoxicating happiness. 6 months of being a father. Then it had all been stolen in one single terrible night. The car skidded to a harsh, screaming stop outside the police station entrance. Luca threw the door open and jumped out before Dante could utter a single word, charging inside the building. He moved down the austere, fluorescent-lit halls in long, hard, furious strides, heedless of the fearful looks and hushed murmurs he left in his wake. Everyone knew who he was. Everyone knew Luca Benedetti was a man nobody provoked. Detective Torres was waiting for him at the end of the hall, her demeanor sober. She brought him into a small, nondescript interview room and calmly explained the situation. A child had been found. A crescent-shaped birthmark behind the right ear. The right place, the right shape, but they needed a definitive DNA test to confirm the identity. Luca nodded curtly. He would do anything. A medical technician arrived promptly to draw his blood. Luca sat perfectly still as the needle slid into his vein, his eyes fixed on the blank wall in front of him, though he wasn't truly seeing it. Then the waiting began. Torres said the results would return in just a few hours because they were utilizing a rapid DNA processing system reserved for high-priority cases. A few hours. To Luca, it felt like several agonizing centuries. Unable to sit, Luca rose. He paced the small room relentlessly, like a dangerous, caged animal. Dante sat quietly in the corner, silent, watching his brother with profound worry. Every single minute dragged like an hour. Every distant sound in the hallway made Luca snap his head around violently. He tried desperately not to hope too much. He had been devastated 523 times before. He was genuinely unsure if he could survive the 524th disappointment. But something felt profoundly different this time. Something in Torres's voice when she had called. A quiet certainty he had never heard in any previous call. The door opened precisely 3 hours later. Torres stepped in, a stack of official papers held loosely in her hand. Her face was entirely unreadable, professional, and guarded, as always. Luca stopped pacing instantly. He turned to face her, his entire body trembling violently even as he tried to hold himself rigidly still. He was the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago. He had ordered the execution of traitors without a second thought. He had stared into the eyes of death countless times and never flinched. But now he was shaking like a leaf caught in a hurricane, waiting for this woman to tell him whether his daughter was still alive. Torres looked at him for a long, heavy moment. Then she spoke, her voice measured. "It is a positive match, Mr. Benedetti. The child is Amelia Benedetti, your daughter." Luca did not remember how he collapsed. He only knew his knees hit the cold, hard floor and a sound. A raw, primal sound of profound loss and sudden, blinding relief tore out of his throat. It was not the controlled cry of a grown man, let alone a crime lord. It was the devastating cry of a father who had lost everything and had just miraculously found a reason to live again. Dante rushed to him, dropping to his knees instantly and wrapping his arms tightly around his shattered brother. But Luca felt nothing except the scalding heat of tears running down his face and the wild, impossible beating of his heart in his chest. His daughter, Amelia. After 5 years, she was alive. Torres led Luca and Dante to another, more comfortable room at the end of the hallway. It was a room specifically furnished for cases involving children, with soft chairs, bright lighting, and a few thoughtfully placed toys in the corner. But Luca saw nothing except the little girl sitting on the blue sofa. His heart missed a beat entirely, then began to pound again with a shocking force. Amelia, his daughter, the child he had searched for across 5 long, desperate years, was sitting right in front of him. But she was no longer the 6-month-old baby from his tormented memories. She had grown. She was 5 years old. 5 years of her life he had tragically missed. 5 years he had not been there to watch her grow, to hear her call him Daddy. She was sitting securely in the lap of a young woman. Small arms were wrapped tightly around the woman's neck, as if she were the only dependable life raft in a vast, terrifying ocean. A torn, well-loved stuffed rabbit was wedged protectively between them. Her black curls were messy but clean, and her warm brown eyes, Catalina's eyes, were watching him with guarded fear. Luca took a single, hesitant step forward, and the little girl immediately flinched and shrank back. She hid behind the woman holding her, showing only half her small face, staring at him in palpable panic. Luca stopped instantly, feeling as if someone had brutally punched him directly in the chest. His daughter was afraid of him. The child he had spent 5 years searching for was looking at him as if he were a monster waiting to strike. The pain that tore through him was sharper and worse than 1,000 bullets. The young woman looked up at him with an expression that was a complex mix of wariness and fierce protection. She had chestnut brown hair, steady green eyes, and a face that, though thin, was strikingly beautiful in its sincerity. She wore old, faded jeans and a light blue sweater, looking like someone who had just returned home from an exhausting, honest day of work. Torres had told Luca about her. Sophia Bennett, the waitress who had found Amelia in a damp cardboard box behind a dumpster and taken her into her modest home to care for her. She had saved his daughter's life. Luca moved closer, slowly, each step excruciatingly careful. He would rather die than frighten his daughter more. When he was just a few feet from the sofa, he stopped and, in a moment of pure, agonizing humility, dropped to his knees. He lowered himself until his eyes were level with the suspicious brown eyes peeking out from behind Sophia. It was the first time in Luca Benedetti's ruthless life that he had ever knelt before anyone. He was a mafia boss. He was the man the entire Chicago underworld bowed to. But in front of his lost daughter, he was only a father begging simply to be seen by the child he had never stopped loving. Amelia, he managed to say, his voice rough and thick with overwhelming emotion. Do you know you have a birthmark behind your right ear? A crescent? Your mother said it looked exactly like the moon when it was brand new. The little girl did not answer immediately, but her eyes blinked slowly, as if she were desperately trying to access a memory buried deep beneath years of trauma. Luca pressed on, his voice trembling uncontrollably. Your full name is Amelia Catalina Benedetti. Your mother named you after your grandmother. Your grandmother's name was Amelia, and your mother's name was Catalina. Your mother said you were the perfect combination of the 2 women she loved most in the world. The girl still stayed hidden behind Sophia, but she was no longer actively shrinking away. Her brown eyes watched him now with curiosity threaded through the confusion. I have been looking for you for 5 years. Luca went on, hot tears spilling down his sharp-featured face without him bothering to wipe them away. I never stopped searching. Not one day went by that I did not think about you. I love you, Amelia. I love you more than anything in this entire world. The little girl watched him for a long, silent time. Then, she turned her head slowly to look at Sophia, her eyes brimming with uncertainty, searching for confirmation from her protector. Sophia looked down at the child safe in her arms. She did not know much about Luca Benedetti, only the clinical facts Torres had given her. That he was a powerful, influential businessman, that his daughter had been stolen 5 years ago, and that he had never, ever stopped searching. But when she looked into the raw, unguarded eyes of the man kneeling desperately in front of her, she saw something no words could adequately describe. The eyes of a father who had walked through hell itself to find his child. The eyes of a man who had lost everything and was now looking at a devastating, impossible miracle. She nodded gently to Amelia. "It is true, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice filled with tenderness. "He is your father. He has been searching for you for a very, very long time." The little girl looked at Sophia, then back at Luca, then back at Sophia one more time. Slowly, with immense care, she loosened her arms from Sophia's neck. She remained settled in Sophia's lap, still gripping the stuffed rabbit, but she was no longer actively hiding. She looked straight into Luca's tear-filled eyes, and for the first time, Luca saw something there besides pure, instinctual fear. "Daddy?" Amelia whispered, as if testing the strange, ancient word on her tongue. Luca completely broke. He did not try to hold it in. Tears poured down like heavy rain over his strong, sharp face, and he did not care who saw. "That is right, princess," he choked out, his voice utterly broken. "Daddy is here. Daddy is here now, and he is never leaving you again." They stayed like that for a long, heavy time. Amelia remained safely in Sophia's lap, her huge eyes never leaving Luca. It was not a reunion ripped from a movie script, filled with tight, immediate hugs and bursts of joyful laughter. It was the fragile reunion of strangers, of a father and a child who no longer remembered each other, separated by the chasm of time. But it was a beginning, and for Luca, a beginning was everything he needed. Finally, Luca stood and turned his full attention to Sophia. His voice was still shaking with lingering emotion. "You," he said, meeting her eyes with fierce gratitude, "you saved my daughter's life. What do you want? Money, a house, a car, anything you desire, it is yours. Name your price." Sophia looked at him for a long, thoughtful moment. She considered her damp, perpetually failing apartment, the mountain of unpaid bills, the unrelenting hard life she had struggled through for years. Then she looked down at the little girl still nestled in her lap. The child was still gripping Sophia's hand with tiny, fisted fingers, as if terrified Sophia would vanish into thin air. "I do not want your money," Sophia said quietly. "I do not want anything. I only want to know that Amelia will be okay now." Luca looked at her as if she had just spoken a language he had never heard before. In his dark, cynical world, everyone wanted something. Everyone had an exact, definable price. But this woman, this simple waitress with worn sneakers and a sweater faded from countless washes, only wanted the assurance that the child would be safe. "Who are you?" Luca wondered internally. "And why are you so impossibly different?" When Luca eventually offered, his voice gentle now, to take Amelia home with him, the little girl immediately panicked. She clung desperately to Sophia, tiny fingers fisting tightly in Sophia's sweater, as if she were terrified of being pulled into the void. Her terrified crying filled the small, quiet room, a devastating sound that tore instantly at the heart of both men present. Everyone who heard it. Luca stood there, utterly helpless, his hands hanging stiffly at his sides, completely adrift in his own mansion. He was the most powerful man in Chicago, a figure of absolute authority. He could issue an order that would move hundreds of men, and they would execute it without a flicker of hesitation. But here, facing his own daughter, he was impotent. He could not make her stop crying. He could not compel her to trust him. Sophia watched the interchange. Amelia's terrified glance at Luca, then her momentary calm glance at Amelia, then the frantic return look to Luca. She understood the deep-seated fear at play. The little girl had endured trauma too profound to be easily overcome. She needed time, and more than anything, she desperately needed psychological stability. And right now, in this terrifying new world, Sophia was the only person Amelia believed she could rely on. "Maybe I should go with you," Sophia heard herself suggest, the words sounding spontaneous even to her own ears. "Just until she starts getting used to this new environment and feels safe." Luca looked at her for a long, intense moment, his gray eyes searching her face as if looking for a flaw in her motives. Then, slowly, he gave a short, weary nod. The sleek black limousine, silent and imposing, carried them through the crowded streets of Chicago, eventually heading toward the exclusive suburbs where the elaborate mansions of the city's upper echelon sat, secluded behind massive, ornate gates. Sophia sat in the spacious back seat, Amelia tightly curled in her lap. The little girl's brown eyes stared out the tinted window with a look of profound, anxious unease, taking in the alien landscape. Luca sat directly across from them. His intense gaze never left his daughter, not for a single second, even when the car finally pulled to a stop in front of an enormous, wrought iron gate. Sophia could not quite believe her eyes. This was not merely a house. It was a fortress, a veritable palace built for a king. The Benedetti estate spread across a small, manicured hill, surrounded by high, impenetrable stone walls and protective rows of lush, mature trees. The main building soared 3 imposing stories high, detailed with pristine white stone columns and enormous, floor-to-ceiling windows that seemed to reflect the sky. A monumental marble fountain stood static and grand in the center of the courtyard, and meticulously trimmed flower beds lined the paved walkway leading up to the entrance. Sophia had only ever seen homes of this staggering scale on television or flipping through glossy magazines. She had never, not in her wildest fantasy, imagined she would actually step foot inside such a place. The contrast with her own life, her dingy, shabby apartment, was so severe, it rendered the scene almost unreal. At her place, the cheap plaster walls were stained dark with persistent dampness and the kitchen faucet was permanently corroded and rusted. Here, everything, down to the smallest ornamental detail, gleamed with an expensive, perfect polish. When they stepped inside the echoing foyer, an Asian woman, perhaps around 50, hurried out from the deeper, shadowed parts of the house. She had jet-black hair pulled back into a severe, tidy bun, and her eyes were visibly reddened and swollen, as if she had been weeping for hours. The instant she spotted Amelia clutched tightly in Sophia's arms, she stopped dead, as if suddenly struck by an overwhelming bolt of lightning. "Amelia?" she whispered, the name catching in her throat, tears instantly spilling down her weathered cheeks. "My baby girl, Amelia, you're home." Sophia immediately realized this had to be Grace, the longtime housekeeper Torres had mentioned. She had worked for the Benedetti family for 25 years, and she had been the one to care for Amelia from the day she was born. Grace rushed toward them, her arms wide open and outstretched, fueled by a powerful, uncontrollable instinct. But Amelia immediately recoiled, shrinking deeper into the safety of Sophia's embrace, and began to tremble violently. Sophia reacted quickly and decisively, stepping forward to interpose herself between the two. "She is scared," Sophia said, her voice gentle but infused with an unyielding firmness. "Please, give her a moment. She needs time." Grace stopped short, halting her desperate approach, the tears still streaming down her face unchecked. She looked at Amelia with an expression of raw, agonizing pain that she could not possibly conceal. But after a difficult moment, she nodded slowly and stepped back, retreating several paces. They brought Amelia up to the specially prepared pink room on the second floor. It was the room Luca had kept meticulously untouched for 5 agonizing years. But when the little girl saw the unfamiliar space, filled with furniture and expensive toys she did not remember and could not connect with, she began to cry hysterically and spiral into panic. She would not sit on the ornate princess bed. She absolutely refused to touch any of the toys spread out invitingly. She clung only to Sophia and the familiar, battered stuffed rabbit she called Bun Bun, pushing away everything else this opulent new world offered. Sophia understood the mechanism instantly. To Amelia, this was a strange, echoing house and an utterly strange, overwhelming world. Everything was too vast, too bright, too intensely different from whatever confined space and limited life she had known for the past 5 years. She desperately needed the simple, anchoring safety that only familiar constants could provide. And right now, the single, most reliable familiar thing she had was Sophia. Sophia sat down quietly in the corner of the lavish room. Amelia securely settled in her lap and began to sing a lullaby, the very same gentle song Sophia's own grandmother used to sing to her long ago. Slowly, minute by painful minute, the small, tense body softened, and the deep brown eyes began to droop heavily. Luca stood vigil outside the bedroom, watching the fragile scene through the narrow, dark gap of the half-open door. He watched a complete stranger hold his daughter, calmly and effectively doing the one thing he, with all his power, could not do. He watched Amelia finally sink into a deep, peaceful sleep in Sophia's arms, her face serene in a way it never was when he dared to come near. And in that silent moment, he grasped a painful, crushing truth. His daughter was profoundly afraid of him. Amelia feared Luca in the deep, instinctive way a child fears the monstrous presence of a nightmare. Sophia saw this clearly every time she monitored the child's reactions. Whenever Luca took a step into the room, Amelia would physically shrink back. Every time he spoke, she would begin to tremble. But she did not react like that to Grace, or to any of the other women employed in the house. Only to Luca, only to Dante when he came by, only to men, especially large, imposing men. Sophia's mind immediately went back to the rough man in the black leather jacket Amelia had described. She thought of the physical bruises that had marked that small body. She considered the 5 years the little girl had spent in the suffocating care of her kidnapper, and she finally grasped the underlying cause. Amelia was not afraid of Luca because of who he was as a person or a father. Amelia was afraid of Luca simply because he was a man. Because a man had been the source of pain and terror through the earliest, most formative years of her life. Because, in her young, traumatized mind, men equated to pain and imprisonment. Sophia looked back through the crack in the door and saw Luca still standing there, cloaked in the darkness and shadows of the hallway. His face was drowned in silent suffering, his normally hard gray eyes visibly wet with unshed tears, and Sophia's heart tightened with a fierce protective instinct when she realized that the most powerful, feared man in this entire city was, in the end, nothing more than a shattered father desperately trying to find a broken path back to his own daughter. The next morning, Sophia went looking for Luca and found him in his private office. The room was immense and intimidating, lined with towering bookshelves that rose all the way to the ceiling, dominated by a massive oak desk set before a window that offered a sweeping, perfect view of the winter garden. Luca was seated there, but he was clearly not working. He was only staring blankly into nothing, with the hollow, unfocused eyes of a man who had not slept a single minute all night. "I want to suggest something," Sophia said, stepping inside the quiet sanctum. Luca slowly lifted his head to look at her. He did not speak a word. He only waited, expecting her to continue. "Amelia needs time," Sophia continued, speaking clearly and directly. "She doesn't remember you, and she is afraid of you. Not because you are a bad person, Luca, but because she went through absolutely terrible things with another man. She needs someone to help her understand that you are not like him, that you are safe." Luca remained silent for a beat, processing the gravity of her words. "I understand," he finally said, his voice deep and rough. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "Let me stay," Sophia said, stating her proposal plainly and without apology. "I will be the bridge between you and Amelia. I will help her get used to you slowly in small, safe increments, so she can genuinely understand that you are her father and that you love her." Before Luca could respond or fully commit, the office door suddenly opened, and Dante strode in unannounced. He had clearly overheard the end of the conversation, and his face was immediately clouded with intense suspicion. "You plan to let a stranger stay in your house?" Dante asked, his voice sharp and dangerously cold. "Someone you met just yesterday." What exactly do you know about her history or her motivations? She saved Amelia's life, Luca replied, his tone calm but definitively firm. She could be anyone, Dante shot back, gesturing dismissively. She could have her own motives. You are a mafia boss, Luca. You have dozens of enemies who want to see you fail. How do you know she isn't one of theirs, planted here to cause chaos? Luca looked steadily at his brother for a long, weighty moment. Then he turned his gaze back to Sophia, who stood in composed silence, waiting for his ultimate verdict. He remembered the protective way she held Amelia at the police station. He remembered her sincere refusal of his money. He remembered the look of pure, protective love she directed at his daughter, a look he hadn't witnessed in anyone since Catalina died. I trust her, Luca stated simply. Dante opened his mouth, clearly ready to launch into a full argument, but Luca instantly raised a commanding hand to stop him. This is my decision. She stays. Run a background check on her if it makes you feel better, but she stays. Dante stared at his brother, visibly helpless and defeated by the finality of the command, then turned a look of icy warning toward Sophia. I am watching you, he threatened before turning sharply and walking out of the room. And just like that, Sophia Bennett, a humble waitress surviving in a shabby apartment with a meager, empty bank account, became a resident of the formidable Benedetti estate. She was immediately given a private room right next to Amelia's, complete with every comfort and luxury she had never even dared to dream of possessing. But Sophia truly did not care about the overwhelming luxuries surrounding her. She cared only about the small, traumatized 5-year-old girl who needed her constant, stabilizing presence. In the intense days that followed, Sophia began the difficult, delicate work she had offered to perform. She started by gently telling Amelia about Luca. Not grand, intimidating stories of power, but small, intimate ones. She told Amelia that her father had kept this pink room exactly the same for 5 years because he missed her so terribly. She told her he had searched for her without stopping, without ever losing hope. She told her he loved her very much, but that he simply did not know how to adequately show it yet. Amelia listened attentively, her curious brown eyes focused on Sophia's face. She still did not speak much, but she no longer instinctively shrank back every time she heard Luca's name mentioned. That, Sophia acknowledged, was tangible progress. Sophia also dedicated time to teaching Luca how to approach his daughter without causing fear. Do not come too close too fast, she warned him repeatedly. Do not speak loudly. Do not look straight into her eyes for too long. It's too intense. Let her come to you when she is truly ready. Luca followed her guidance with painful, unwavering obedience. He began by sitting quietly in the hallway immediately outside Amelia's room, reading stories in a voice just loud enough for her to hear clearly through the door left slightly ajar. He did not force her to look at him. He did not force her to speak or interact. He simply stayed there, a constant present shadow, so she would know fundamentally that he was not going anywhere. The first few days, Amelia simply pretended she could not hear him, but little by little, she began to position herself closer to the door when Luca read. Then, she began to peek out through the crack, her small, round eye just visible. Then, she started genuinely listening to the stories. A week later, Amelia asked Sophia a question that caught her completely off guard. Does Daddy know how to smile? She asked, as they sat playing quietly with dolls in the room. I have never seen Daddy smile. Sophia paused, looking down into the innocent brown eyes, searching for the perfect answer. She thought of Luca, of his sharp, powerful features always drawn tight with tension, of his gray eyes perpetually full of sorrow. She realized, with a shock, that she had not seen him smile once since the day they met. Your daddy has been very, very sad for a long time, Sophia said gently, choosing her words carefully, because he missed you so much. But now that you are home, maybe he will learn how to smile again. Amelia was quiet for a long moment, deep in thought. Then she spoke again, her voice tiny and barely a whisper. I want to see Daddy smile. Sophia's heart instantly warmed. She knew this was a huge, momentous step forward. The little girl was beginning to care about Luca, She was starting to see him not only as a frightening, looming man, but as a father, a human being who needed to be loved and comforted. And Sophia silently promised herself that she would do absolutely everything within her power to help this broken father and daughter find their way back to each other again. 2 weeks passed inside the highly structured existence of the Benedetti estate. 2 weeks filled with small, hesitant steps that still carried real, significant weight. Amelia still would not allow Luca to physically touch her, but she no longer screamed and cried every time she caught sight of him. She had accepted staying in her room and listening patiently to him read through the door left slightly ajar. Sometimes, when he gave the story characters silly, exaggerated voices, she even let out a small, unexpected giggle. Those rare moments were the only times Luca felt truly, genuinely felt like a father again. One evening, while Sophia was tidying Amelia's room after the little girl had finally fallen asleep, she found something that was terribly wrong. Under Amelia's pillow, hidden deep inside the pillowcase, was a secret pile of food, stale cookies, a crust of bread, a few melting candies, and even an apple that had gone soft and shriveled. Everything had been meticulously wrapped in paper napkins. Sophia stood there staring at that small, pathetic hoard, her heart breaking entirely in her chest. She understood its meaning immediately. Amelia had been starved. She had lived with the constant, grinding fear of never knowing when the next meal would come, a fear so deeply embedded in her bones that even now, even in a house overflowing with lavish food, she could not stop saving it. It was pure, raw survival instinct. It was a severe wound in the mind that would take a very, very long time to heal. Sophia did not throw the food away. She simply replaced the spoiled items with fresher, carefully wrapped ones, ensuring that Amelia would know Sophia was not taking away the one source of safety and control she believed she had. Then Sophia quietly left the room, silent tears sliding unchecked down her cheeks. Luca found her a few minutes later outside on the massive stone balcony, staring out at the formal garden, which was buried under a silent blanket of fresh white snow. He was about to ask if she was all right when he noticed something unexpected. Her thick sweater had slipped slightly off one shoulder, revealing a long, unmistakable scar on her pale skin. The scar ran from her shoulder down near her shoulder blade, faded, white, and uneven, clearly the enduring mark of a serious injury that had healed long, long ago. "Where did you get hurt?" Luca asked, the question escaping him before he could stop himself. Sophia spun around, startled, and hurriedly pulled her sweater back up to cover the revealing scar. But she knew immediately it was too late. He had seen it all. "It is nothing," she said, her voice tight and defensive. "Just an old accident." Luca looked at her for a long moment. His gray eyes, usually flat with sorrow, were now sharp as a honed blade, cutting through the fragile emotional armor she was trying to construct. He had lived in the world of violence for too long to be fooled. He instantly recognized that scar was not from an accident. It was the scar of someone who had been deliberately attacked, someone who had fought to survive. "Who did that to you?" he asked again, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. Sophia turned her face away and looked out at the snowy garden. She was quiet for a significant length of time, and Luca did not push her. He simply stood there, radiating intense, focused patience, and waited. Finally, Sophia spoke. "My ex-husband," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We got married when I was 22. I truly thought he loved me." She let out a heavy sigh. "I was terribly wrong." The memories surged back like a thick, black wave of trauma. Sophia remembered the first night he hit her. "Just a slap," he had insisted later. He apologized profusely. He promised her he would never, ever do it again. She believed him then. But then the slap eventually became vicious punches. The punches rapidly escalated into brutal beatings. He controlled everything in her life, her money, her contact with friends, her family connections. She was completely isolated, with absolutely no one to run to. "This scar," Sophia lifted a hand to instinctively touch her shoulder, "is from a night when he was blackout drunk. He threw a heavy glass bottle at me. It shattered and the glass cut deeply into my shoulder. I had to stitch the wound myself because he absolutely would not let me go to the hospital. Luca stood motionless, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like marble. His hand curled into a hard, white-knuckled fist at his side. I ran away one brutal winter night 2 years ago, Sophia continued, her voice now sounding strangely detached, as if she were telling the story of someone else entirely. I waited until he was dead asleep and wouldn't wake. Then I climbed out the window of our second-floor apartment. I took nothing with me except a few coins and the clothes I was wearing. I walked all night long through the snow until I finally found a bus station hours later. I came to Chicago because it was the farthest place I could possibly reach with the tiny amount of money I had saved. She finally turned back to Luca. Her green eyes were wet with unshed tears but held a fierce, unbroken resilience. I rebuilt my life from those ruins. I found a job. I found an apartment. It is not much, but it is mine. I do not have to be afraid every time I hear footsteps in the hallway. I am free. Luca looked at her intently, and he saw something he had genuinely never witnessed in anyone within his brutal, cynical world. He saw pure, quiet strength. Not the superficial strength of money or overwhelming power, but the profound, innate strength of someone who had walked straight through hell and still managed to stay standing, intact. "Where is he?" Luca asked, his voice now cold as permafrost. "Him. Your ex-husband. Where is he now?" Sophia shook her head quickly. "I don't know, and I truly don't want to know. And I do not want you to do anything to him, Luca." "I did not ask what you want," Luca said, his gray eyes darkening with predatory purpose. "I asked where he is." Sophia looked at him and instantly understood that absolutely nothing she said would stop this man from acting. She let out a slow, defeated breath and gave him the name. She said he was in Indiana the last time she heard any news. Luca simply nodded once, definitively. He turned to leave, but before he stepped off the balcony and into the house, he paused, his back still toward her. "You saved my daughter," he said, the words quiet but carrying immense weight. "You deserve to be protected." That night, long after Sophia had finally gone to sleep, Luca summoned Dante into his dimly lit office. "Find a man named," and he stated the name Sophia had given him. "He is currently in Indiana. Find him." Dante nodded silently, not needing to ask why. "What do you want me to do with him once I have him?" Luca looked out the dark window, his gray eyes shining cold as steel under the office light. "Teach him a lesson," he said slowly, deliberately. "Make him understand, down to his bones, what happens when he touches the people I protect. But do not kill him. Let him live and remember that pain for the rest of his life." A piercing, terrified scream tore through the quiet night inside the vast Benedetti estate. Sophia sprang up from her bed like a tightly coiled spring, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She recognized that sound instantly. It was Amelia. She ran out of her room and threw herself toward the room next door. Luca had gotten there first. He stood frozen in the doorway, his face twisted with raw pain as he watched his daughter curled up violently on the immense bed, sobbing uncontrollably and screaming in sheer panic. Amelia did not recognize her father standing there. Her big brown eyes were wide open, but they were not truly seeing anything in the present. She was still fully trapped inside the horrors of the nightmare. "Don't!" she cried out, her voice raw. "Don't hit me. I am sorry. I will be good. Do not put me back in the box." It was an agonizing cry of profound, existential terror. Luca took a single step forward, the overwhelming instinct of a father rising up fiercely within him, the desperate need to gather his terrified child into his arms and shield her from the imaginary ghosts in her mind. But Sophia caught his arm and shook her head sharply. "Let me," she whispered urgently. She moved quickly to the bedside and sat down slowly and non-threateningly. "Mila," she called softly, using the pet name she had adopted. "Mila, sweetheart, wake up. This is only a bad dream. You are home now. You are safe." She did not attempt to touch Amelia right away. She only sat there, speaking in a gentle, steady, utterly calm voice until the panicked brown eyes began, slowly, to focus again. When Amelia finally recognized Sophia, the little girl instantly threw herself into her arms and collapsed into deep, racking sobs. Sophia held her tight, rubbed her small back with slow, comforting circles, and began to sing the familiar lullaby from her grandmother. Luca stood rigid at the door, watching the entire exchange with a shattered heart. He yearned to do what Sophia was doing. He wanted more than anything to be the one comforting his daughter, but he knew with absolute certainty that if he came any closer right now, Amelia would only become more terrified. So he stayed exactly where he was, silent, waiting in the darkness. Then Sophia did something he did not anticipate. She looked up at him and signaled subtly for him to come nearer. When he hesitated, she moved her lips without making a sound. "Come here." Luca cautiously stepped forward, his movements unnaturally light, as if he were afraid of breaking something impossibly fragile. He sat down carefully on the very edge of the bed, maintaining a safe distance from Amelia. Sophia continued holding the little girl close, but she began to speak directly to the child. "Mila, do you hear that sound? That is your father, Luca. He ran all the way here the very moment he heard you crying. He is so worried about you." Amelia did not say anything or look up, but she did not instinctively flinch or recoil the way she had before. Perhaps it was because she was still half lost in the fog of sleep. Perhaps it was because she was simply too exhausted to find the energy to be afraid. And then, for the first time, Luca spoke inside his daughter's room while she was awake. "I am here, Amelia," he said, his voice husky and rough with emotion he could barely contain. "I will not let anyone frighten you ever again. Promise." They stayed like that, held in a charged silence, until Amelia slowly drifted back into a deeper, safer sleep. Sophia gently laid her down and pulled the blanket up tightly around her small body. Luca looked at the peaceful face of his daughter in sleep, and he felt the profound stirring of something he had completely forgotten existed for a very long time. Hope. They quietly left Amelia's room and went downstairs to the living room. The clock on the mantel read 3 o'clock in the morning, and they both knew they would not be able to sleep again that night. Luca poured 2 fingers of dark whiskey and handed 1 heavy glass to Sophia. She sat on the sofa and accepted it, even though she was decidedly not someone who usually drank hard liquor. After a long, restorative silence, Sophia spoke again. "What did she call her mother? Catalina?" Luca replied instantly, his eyes going distant and hazy at the sound of the name. "Her full name was Catalina Maria Benedetti, but I called her Cat. She hated that nickname." He tried to smile, but the expression did not quite reach the depth of sorrow in his eyes. "What was she like?" Sophia asked softly, respectfully. Luca was quiet for a long time, staring deeply into the amber liquid swirling in his glass, as if the answer might somehow be waiting there for him. "She was light," he finally said, his voice barely a breath. "In my dark, brutal world, she was the only thing that shone with purity. She did not care who I was or what my family did. She only saw me, the real me, the core of who I was, and she loved that man unconditionally. That realization was a constant, searing pain." He paused, his jaw hardening like stone as the bitter memories roared back. The day the accident happened, she was driving home from her weekly meeting, a support group for parents of missing children. She went religiously, a pilgrimage of hope, even though I pleaded with her to let it go. I told her it was pointless. I argued it was a cruel waste of her energy and our time. Our final words to each other, Luca admitted, his voice shattering into pieces, were hurled in anger. A fight. I found her in the sterile quiet of the hospital room. A drunk driver had crossed the median and hit her car head-on. She clung to life just long enough to deliver her final, sacred charge. What did she say? Sophia whispered, her breath catching. She said, "Find our child." Luca managed, the tears finally overflowing and carving paths down his unshaven cheeks. That was the last breath she wasted on me. Find Amelia. Bring her home. They sat in absolute silence for a long, heavy stretch of time. Then Luca spoke again, his voice dropping to a harsh, barely audible whisper. There were nights I desperately wanted to follow her. He confessed, the admission stripping him bare. There were nights I sat in Amelia's vacant room with a gun in my hand and reasoned that if my little girl was truly dead, then I had forfeited every single reason to keep breathing. Sophia felt a sharp, agonizing tightening in her chest. She carefully set her glass down on the table and reached across the short space for Luca's hand. His skin was shockingly cold, and his hand was trembling uncontrollably beneath hers. "But you stayed," she said firmly, her gaze unwavering. "You did not follow her. You stayed and you kept searching relentlessly. And because you stayed, you found Amelia and you found desire." Luca slowly looked down at their hands, fingers intimately woven together, then lifted his gaze to meet Sophia's face. In her steady green eyes, he recognized the one thing he hadn't encountered in anyone since the day Catalina died. Understanding. It wasn't pity, which he hated. It wasn't fear, which he expected. It was deep, empathic understanding from someone who had also walked through profound darkness and intimately knew how utterly terrifying that road was. "Thank you," he whispered, the sound raw. "For what?" "For staying." The call came late on a Tuesday morning. It was 1 week after the night Amelia suffered her worst nightmare since returning home. Luca was sitting in the cold silence of his private office when the phone vibrated, jolting him from his thoughts. Detective Torres's name lit up the screen in an insistent, sharp white. "Mr. Benedetti." Torres's voice was sharper and more serious than Luca had ever heard it. "We caught him, the man who kidnapped your daughter. His name is Vincent Russo." Luca's heart seemed to seize up, missing a beat entirely before beginning to race violently. Vinny. The name hammered inside his skull like a desperate alarm bell. Luca didn't just know Vinny. He knew him intimately. Vincent Russo had once been one of the most trusted men in the entire Benedetti organization. 10 years prior, Vinny had served as Dante Sr.'s trusted right hand. He was beloved, trusted like an adopted son, a true member of the family. He knew every detail of their operations, every vulnerable secret, every potential weakness. Then, 6 years earlier, Dante had uncovered the truth. Vinny had been trafficking hard drugs behind the family's back. This was the one unforgivable sin. Luca's father despised the drug trade. He always maintained that drugs ruin people, destroy families, and annihilate the very community they were pledged to protect. Vinny was exiled, cast out of the organization but mercifully spared execution. This was only because Luca's father still held a lingering trace of affection for the man who had served him loyally for so many years. But Vinny was utterly stripped of everything. His money, his power, his honor. He devolved into a man no one even cared to look at in Chicago's vast underworld. Luca hadn't thought about Vinny in 5 years. He had never once conceived that the man who had stolen his daughter would be the same broken individual his father had once chosen to spare. Luca drove to the police station with Dante in the passenger seat. Neither of them spoke the entire ride. The air inside the luxury car was so dense with unexpressed rage and shock that it felt physically difficult to breathe. When they arrived, Torres led Luca down a sterile corridor to a small, enclosed viewing room with a one-way glass panel facing the interrogation room. And there, sitting hunched over on an unforgiving iron chair, his hands secured in cuffs, was Vincent Russo. Vinny had aged dramatically in 6 years. He looked older, gaunt, his face deeply hollowed, with a patchy, graying beard clinging to his jawline, and the dull, clouded eyes of a man who had long surrendered to alcohol. But Luca still recognized him. He recognized the man who had sat at the family's holiday table, the man who had held the infant Amelia in the hospital nursery, the man who had sworn a sacred oath to protect the Benedetti family until his last breath. Luca pushed past Torres and entered the interrogation room. Torres attempted to restrain him, but one look from eyes that were now the cold, forbidding gray of forged steel instantly silenced her and forced her retreat. The heavy door clicked shut behind Luca, locking them in the small room. Vinny slowly lifted his head at the sound of the approaching footsteps. When he recognized the formidable figure standing before him, a slow, sickening smile cracked across his ruined, wrinkled face. "Luca," Vinny rasped, his voice rough and laced with the cumulative damage of cheap liquor and stale cigarettes. "It has been a very long time." "You look much older," Luca stated flatly. He stood motionless, simply staring at the man who had maliciously stolen 5 years of his daughter's life. His eyes unblinking, holding back a terrible storm. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice perilously low and deeply dangerous. Vinny laughed. A short, abrasive sound that was cold and full of corrosive bitterness. "Why? You're actually asking me why?" He leaned forward, his cloudy eyes suddenly flaring with white-hot hatred. "Because your family took everything from me. Because your father threw me onto the street like a stray dog after 20 years of absolute loyalty. Because I wanted you to know exactly what it feels like to lose the single most precious thing you have." "My daughter," Luca snarled, the realization sickening. "You kidnapped my daughter." "I meant to demand ransom," Vinny shrugged, dismissive. "But you hunted too hard, too fast. I couldn't risk making contact, so I kept the brat. I raised her for 5 years. 5 years, Luca. Do you have any idea how expensive it is to raise a child?" Luca felt his blood rush to a rapid, violent boil. In his mind, he saw the faint, fading bruises on Amelia's delicate body. He saw the stale food she had desperately hidden beneath her pillow. He saw the ingrained, debilitating fear in her wide brown eyes whenever an unfamiliar man came too close. "What did you do to her?" he ground out through clenched teeth. Vinny shrugged again, as if the question was trivial and beneath him. "I raised her. Sometimes she didn't listen, so I had to discipline her. That's how you teach children respect." "And then you threw her in the trash," Luca stated, demanding the final horrific detail. "I ran out of money," Vinny said casually, discussing it as if he were commenting on the weather. "My remaining men abandoned me. The little brat became nothing but a liability. She ate up my dwindling cash, cried all day, and didn't serve any useful purpose, so I threw her away like garbage." He offered a short, mocking chuckle. "I figured she'd die in that box. But it looks like you got lucky, Benedetti." Luca did not recall consciously moving. He only knew his entire body lunged across the metal table before anyone, inside or outside the room, could react. He grabbed Vinny by the front of his shirt, yanking him up from the chair with enough raw force to nearly lift the man entirely off the floor. He overturned the heavy iron furniture with a primal roar of pure, incandescent fury. The first punch smashed into Vinny's face with the sickening crack of a broken nose. The second, the third. Luca couldn't stop. He saw his daughter small and crumpled in that damp cardboard box. He saw her shivering uncontrollably in the biting cold night. He saw the sheer, paralyzing terror in her brown eyes when she first looked at him, as if he too were a monster. And he wanted, desperately, to kill the man who had inflicted all of it. Torres and Dante burst into the room an instant later. It took both of them, plus 2 additional uniform officers, to forcibly drag Luca off the bleeding, whimpering Vinny. The kidnapper's face was already swelling dramatically and soaked with dark blood, but he was still alive. He laughed weakly through broken teeth. "You can kill me and it won't change a thing." Vinny spat out a mouthful of blood and shattered enamel. "Those 5 years, I took them from you, and you will never, ever get them back." Torres and Dante struggled to pull Luca out of the interrogation room, down the long, anonymous corridors of the precinct, and finally out through the back exit where there were no reporters, no flashing cameras, and no curious civilian eyes. Luca's hand was still bleeding profusely, his knuckles split and raw from the sheer force of the blows and the unforgiving edge of the metal table. But he didn't care about the physical pain. He couldn't feel anything except the tearing, agonizing pain blazing deep inside his chest. 5 years. 5 years his daughter had been forced to live with that depraved monster. 5 years she had been beaten, starved, and systematically treated like disposable trash. And in the end, when she no longer held any exploitable value, he had discarded her like a broken, useless thing. Luca collapsed onto the cold concrete steps behind the station. His knees struck the hard, rough ground, but he registered no physical pain. He felt only the vast, crushing emptiness consuming everything inside him. He had failed. He was supposed to be the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago. He commanded immense wealth, loyal men, every resource imaginable. Yet he had utterly failed to safeguard his daughter. He hadn't found her for 5 agonizing years. And in those 5 years, she had been systematically subjected to hell. Dante stood a few feet away, completely unsure of how to intervene. He had never witnessed his brother in such a state of dissolution. Luca Benedetti was not supposed to collapse. Luca Benedetti was not weak. But the man kneeling brokenly on the cold concrete steps before Dante was no longer the imposing mafia boss. He was simply a father shattering under the weight of his grief and guilt. Then, they heard hurried footsteps. Dante turned and saw Sophia running toward them, her thin coat hastily thrown over her clothing. Her hair was a tangled mess, suggesting she had been roused abruptly from sleep. Torres had called her directly. The detective intuitively believed Luca needed someone, and she knew the one person who could truly reach him right now was not a brother, and certainly not a soldier. Sophia stopped directly in front of Luca. She gazed down at the man on his knees, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably, blood dripping steadily from his wounded hand onto the unforgiving ground. She did not utter a single word. She simply lowered herself onto the steps beside him and wrapped her arms around his trembling body. Luca's muscles seized instantly, holding him rigid for a moment. It had been 5 years since anyone had truly held him. Since Catalina's death, he had strictly forbidden anyone this kind of closeness. He had constructed impenetrable granite walls around his heart, sealed every emotional doorway, and refused all intimacy. But Sophia's embrace was too warm, too real. Her presence was infinitely too gentle. And Luca, the man who had kept every ounce of pain locked deep inside for half a decade, finally irrevocably broke. He cried. It wasn't the quiet, controlled tears he had shed when he first received the DNA results. This was the violent, guttural sobbing of someone who had held back the ocean for too long. It was the explosion of every pain, every crushing guilt, and every despair he had painstakingly buried deep within his chest. He cried for Amelia, for the 5 years his daughter had tragically lost. He cried for Catalina, for the wife he never had the chance to apologize to before she was taken. He cried for himself, for the cold, lonely man he had become, riddled with invisible wounds no one could see. Sophia did not speak. She only held him tighter and let him cry until the exhaustion claimed him. She didn't try to comfort him with useless, empty phrases. She didn't say everything would miraculously be fine. She simply stayed there, utterly present, letting him know that even in this depth of darkness, he was not alone. Dante stood a few steps away, quietly turning his face aside out of respect. He knew his brother desperately needed this space, and perhaps for the first time in his life, Dante felt profound gratitude for the woman he had doubted for weeks. They sat on those cold steps until the deep night began to surrender to morning. Luca had stopped crying long before, but he did not release Sophia, and she made no move to leave. They sat in weighted silence, shoulder to shoulder, watching the inky black sky slowly fade into the pale gray of dawn. At last, Luca finally spoke, his voice sounding utterly exhausted. "Why are you still here?" "Because you needed someone," Sophia answered simply. "I am a mafia boss," Luca said, pulling back slightly to look straight into her eyes, which were illuminated by the first hint of light. "I have killed people. I have done things you cannot possibly imagine. Why are you not afraid of me?" Sophia was silent for a prolonged moment. She thought of everything she had witnessed over the past weeks. She thought of the formidable man kneeling in front of his daughter's bed, begging her for a chance. She thought of the father who sat in the hallway night after night, reading the same stories to a child who still couldn't bring herself to look at him. She thought of the man who had just shattered completely in her arms because he could not bear the hell his daughter had been forced to carry. "I lived with a truly violent man," she finally said, her voice steady. "I know exactly what a monster looks like." "You are not a monster, Luca. You are only a man who has lost too much and is trying desperately to reclaim what little is left. She turned fully to him, her luminous green eyes meeting his tired gray ones in the dim light of the nascent dawn. And then she added, her voice gentle but immensely strong. You have been trying to be strong entirely on your own for too long. You need someone to lean on too. Everyone does. A month passed within the imposing walls of the Benedetti mansion, and everything had subtly, profoundly changed. Amelia was no longer the frightened little girl who would shrink into the corner of a room every time she caught sight of Luca. She began to look at him with a hesitant curiosity instead of outright panic. She began to sit at the dinner table with him, no longer insisting on eating alone in the sanctuary of her room. And one quiet morning, while Luca was immersed in paperwork in his office, Amelia walked in, clutching her stuffed bunny Bun securely in her arms. "Daddy," she called. Her voice was small, soft, and shy, but it was the single word Luca had been waiting the entire month to hear. Daddy. The first time she had chosen to call him that. The first time she had come to him entirely on her own, without Sophia standing beside her. Luca felt his heart stop for a beat, then accelerate into a furious, hopeful race. He instantly dropped to his knees so he would be perfectly at eye level with his daughter, hardly trusting what his ears had just registered. "I am here, princess," he said, his deep voice trembling slightly. "What do you need?" Amelia held out a piece of paper. It was a recent drawing, vibrantly colored with crayon pencils. In the picture, there were 3 people holding hands. A tall man with dark hair, a woman with warm brown hair, and a little girl situated in the middle, clutching a stuffed bunny. Above them, a sun smiled broadly, and the clouds were shaped like whimsical hearts. "This is our family," Amelia said, pointing carefully to each figure in the picture. "This is Daddy, this is Sophia, and this is me." Luca looked at the simple drawing, and he had to quickly blink several times to prevent the sudden, hot flood of tears. "It is beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It is absolutely beautiful, my girl." Amelia's progress wasn't confined only to precious moments like that. Dr. Nathan Cole, the renowned child psychologist Luca had quietly hired, confirmed that her recovery was proceeding better and faster than expected. "She still has nightmares occasionally," Dr. Cole reported during their weekly meeting, "but the frequency has dropped significantly. She is actively beginning to trust the people around her. She is learning how to feel genuinely safe again, especially with you and Miss Bennet. The steady, predictable presence of both of you has created a strong and necessary foundation for her continued recovery." Sophia had irrevocably become an irreplaceable element of life within the Benedetti mansion. She still slept in the adjacent room to Amelia's. She was still the first one to rush to the little girl when a nightmare struck. She was still the primary bridge between Amelia and Luca, yet her role had shifted once more. She was no longer only a temporary, hired caretaker. She had undeniably become a crucial part of this family, even if the word wasn't spoken out loud. And between her and Luca, something new and potent was unquestionably changing. Looks that lingered a moment too long. Accidental, charged touches when they cared for Amelia together. Evenings spent talking softly in the living room after the little girl had finally fallen asleep. Moments when the air between them grew impossibly heavy with things left desperately unsaid. One evening, as they sat in the living room reading, Luca's hand brushed Sophia's when they both simultaneously reached for the coffee cup on the low table. They both jerked back instantly, as if they had received a sudden electrical shock. "I am sorry," Luca murmured, clearing his throat. "It is fine," Sophia answered, a delicate blush painting her cheeks pink in the lamplight. They looked at each other for one tense, charged moment, and then both immediately turned away. Luca pretended to be completely absorbed in the leather-bound book lying open on the table. Sophia pretended to stare intently out the window into the dark. They both knew exactly what was happening. They were both trying, with all their might, to forcefully deny it. Grace watched them both from the shadow of the corner of the room and simply shook her head with a knowing, fond smile. The housekeeper had worked for the Benedetti family long enough to instantly recognize genuine love when she saw it, and she could observe it as clearly as daylight existing between Luca and Sophia. Only the two people living it were determinately blind. But there was someone who was not blind at all. One sunny afternoon, while Sophia sat playing with Amelia in her room, the little girl suddenly stopped in the middle of putting together a difficult puzzle. The little girl, with the strange seriousness of a 5-year-old who had experienced far too much, looked up at Sophia. "Sophia," she called softly. "Yes, sweetheart? Can I ask you something really important?" "Of course, Mila." Amelia paused, searching the ceiling as if the right words were hiding there. Then she asked, her voice small yet overflowing with pure, fragile hope. "Can Sophia be my mother?" Sophia froze instantly. The air left her lungs. She stared into the wide, expectant brown eyes waiting for her answer. Eyes that had survived unimaginable suffering yet still retained enough innocence to believe in impossible good things. "Mila," she began, her voice already trembling, "you already have a wonderful father. Your father loves you so much." "I know," Amelia nodded quickly, "but I want a mother. All the kids at school have a mother. I want Sophia to be mine." Sophia felt an unexpected, agonizing rush of tears. She was desperately unprepared for this. She loved this child. She knew that absolutely. But what would accepting the role of mother truly mean? It would mean staying here permanently. It would mean fully integrating herself into the Benedetti family's dangerous world. It would mean confronting the terrifying feelings she was still trying fiercely to deny, the feelings she had developed for Luca. And she was utterly uncertain if she was ready for that final leap. Sophia did not answer Amelia's heart-wrenching question right away. She only gathered the little girl into her arms and told her it was a very big question and that she needed time to think about it. Amelia accepted that with the strange, premature patience of a child who had learned how to wait far too early. But before she drifted off to sleep that night, she held Sophia's hand securely and whispered it one more time. "I want Sophia to be my mother," she murmured, her voice already drowsy with sleep. "I love Sophia." Then the brown eyes closed, and the little girl fell asleep with a faint, peaceful smile on her lips. Sophia sat by the bed for a long time afterward, watching Amelia's serene, peaceful face in sleep. Her heart was full of complex, tangled feelings she didn't know how to begin to name. Love, fear, hope, confusion. All of it was tangled together into something she couldn't possibly untie. She finally left Amelia's room and stepped out onto the secluded balcony. The April night was still cool, but the clean, crisp air helped her think a little more clearly. She leaned against the stone railing, looking down at the immense garden washed in stark moonlight, and attempted to put her chaotic thoughts in order. She didn't hear the silent footsteps approaching until Luca was standing right beside her. "Grace said you were out here," he said, his voice low and warmly intimate in the quiet night. "Is Amelia asleep yet?" "Yes," Sophia answered softly, still not turning to look at him. "What did she say to you earlier?" Luca asked. "I heard fragments of it when I walked past the room." Sophia remained quiet for another heavy moment. Then she simply repeated the request. She asked if I could be her mother. Luca did not look surprised at all. He had correctly guessed the nature of the conversation from the fragments he'd overheard. "What did you tell her?" "I don't know what to tell her," Sophia finally admitted, turning to him. In the moonlight, her face looked softer, more vulnerable, and her green eyes shimmered as if they were holding unshed tears. "I don't know what I'm doing here anymore, Luca. I originally came here only to help Amelia get used to you. But now everything is so much more complicated." Luca looked at her for a long, intense moment. Then he slowly let out a breath and said the painful thing he had been holding fiercely inside for weeks. "I don't know what I'm doing either," he admitted, the vulnerability striking. "I am not good at this, Sophia. I don't know how to talk about feelings, and I certainly don't know how to love someone without eventually hurting them. I am a mafia boss. I am a killer. I have powerful enemies everywhere. My life is permanently full of danger and violence. You deserve far more than that." He turned his face away, not daring to meet her eyes. You deserve a normal man with a normal, uncomplicated life. Not me. Not my world. Sophia listened to his painful self-assessment in complete silence. Then she did something he completely did not expect. She stepped closer and gently placed her hand against his stubbled cheek, delicately turning his face back so he was forced to look directly at her. "You think I want a normal life?" she asked, her voice soft but entirely sure. "I had a normal life, Luca. I married a normal man, an accountant with a steady, safe job, who bought a perfectly respectable house in the suburbs. And he turned my life into hell." She took his hand, her fingers steadying his, and guided it down, pressing it firmly against the sensitive skin over her heart, so he could feel the frantic, undeniable rhythm of her heartbeat beneath his palm. "I do not need perfect," she stated, her voice clear and without apology. "I do not need normal. I only need real. I need someone who looks at me the way you look at me now, Luca. I need someone willing to do anything to protect the people they love, even if they have to tear down the world to do it. I need someone who understands that life is not always beautiful and still chooses to keep fighting through the darkness. I need you, Luca. Just you is enough." Luca stared into the depths of her green eyes, watching him with a sincerity, an unflinching honesty, that he realized he had never encountered in anyone, not even in the darkest corners of his own soul. And in that moonlit instant, he understood he should not fight this overwhelming pull anymore. He did not want to. He slowly lifted his hand to cup her cheek, his fingers trembling, not from fear, but from the raw tenderness of the moment, when they touched her soft, warm skin. Then he leaned down, bridging the final distance, and kissed her. The first kiss was gentle and slow, an inquiry, a tentative question asked in the stillness of the night, instead of a claim made by the ruthless boss he was. Their mouths met under the silver moonlight, and Luca felt a profound shift within him, something he had not felt in the 5 years since his life shattered. Hope, happiness, love. When they eventually pulled apart, both of them were breathing unevenly, their hearts hammering a desperate, unified tempo. Luca rested his forehead against Sophia's, his gray eyes closing as he surrendered to the moment. "I do not know if I can do this well," he whispered, the sound raw. "I do not know if I can be the man you deserve, the man she deserves." "We will learn together," Sophia answered, her lips lifting into a smile that promised sanctuary. "I do not know what I am doing either, but I want to try with you, with Amelia." They stood there in each other's arms for a long time, not speaking further, only taking in the profound closeness they had resisted and refused for agonizing weeks. They did not know that there were eyes watching them from the upstairs bedroom window. Amelia had woken up thirsty in the middle of the night, and when she looked outside toward the garden to find Sophia, she saw the two grown-ups holding each other under the beautiful, pale moonlight. She did not understand the entire adult meaning of what she was witnessing, but she understood enough to know it was something extraordinarily good, something that felt like home. And for the very first time since she had been found abandoned in that cold cardboard box, Amelia smiled. Not the shy smile, not the strained, polite smile she had learned to give to make demanding adults happy. This was a real smile, a visceral explosion of pure, unreserved joy, the smile of a child beginning to believe deep down that everything would, finally, be all right. She hugged Bun Bun tight against her chest and whispered into the stuffed bunny's fuzzy ear, "Bun Bun, we are going to have a mom soon." 3 months passed like a beautiful, seamless dream. Sophia had officially become an integral part of the Benedetti family unit. She no longer slept in the guest room. She had moved into Luca's vast master suite, her presence making the space feel less cold and empty. Amelia called her mom every day, morning and night, and that simple word was sweeter to Luca's ear than any music, any promise of power. They ate breakfast together, a routine previously impossible, read stories, and watched silly cartoons together, establishing the rhythm of a real, functional family. But happiness in Luca Benedetti's perilous world never lasted without exacting a terrible price. News of the mysterious woman at the side of the ruthless Mafia boss began to spread swiftly through the shadowy corridors of the underworld. Candid photos of Sophia and Amelia playing innocently in the park. Evidence of Luca's new, glaring vulnerability. Soon appeared on the polished desks of men Luca had made sworn enemies of for years. And the Moretti family, the oldest and most vicious rival of the Benedettis, saw an opportunity they could not ignore. Luca Benedetti has grown weak. They whispered to one another in their dark, smoke-filled rooms. He has a clear weakness now, a woman and a child. We can use that to cripple him. Dante was the first to spot the immediate danger. One afternoon when Sophia went to the supermarket with 2 assigned bodyguards, Dante received a disturbing report. An unfamiliar, black sedan had followed her the entire way. The car did nothing overtly aggressive, only stayed at a methodical distance and took carefully framed pictures. But it was a clear and chilling sign that someone was paying close, strategic attention to Sophia. Dante tightened security immediately, transforming the mansion into an armed fortress. The number of bodyguards was doubled. More sophisticated security cameras were installed all around the expansive estate. Every single trip outside for Sophia and Amelia had to be planned meticulously in advance with a heavily armed protection team assigned. But for Luca, the measures still were not nearly enough. "I want you and Amelia to leave," he told Sophia one cold night in their bedroom. "I have a house in Europe, a secluded estate somewhere no one in this world knows about. You will be safe there until I finish dealing with this escalating threat." Sophia stared at him, outright disbelief etching itself onto her face. "You want me to run? You want me to abandon you?" "I want you safe," Luca answered, his voice tight with controlled desperation. "The Moretti family is not a joke. They have hated the Benedettis since my grandfather's time. If they decide to strike, you and Amelia will undoubtedly be the first targets they choose." Sophia got up from the bed, her green eyes flashing with the same hard resolve Luca had seen the night she told him the harrowing details about her ex-husband. "I ran once already," she said, her voice chillingly cold and absolutely final. "I ran from my ex-husband. Ran from that violent, suffocating marriage from hell. And you know what, Luca? I swore to myself then and there that I would never run again. This is different." Luca rose quickly after her, a furious heat creeping into his voice. "This is not some pathetic, violent husband, Sophia. This is the Mafia, Sophia. They have unlimited guns, trained men, and inexhaustible resources. They will not stop at just watching. So what exactly do you want me to do?" Sophia turned to face him, her posture rigid. "Hide in Europe and sit there waiting anxiously while you stay here and face danger entirely alone? Keep Amelia away from you when she has only just begun to trust you, to call you daddy? I cannot protect you if you are here. And what about me?" Sophia shouted, the first time she had ever truly lost control in front of him, the volume echoing their fear. "You think I want to be protected from you? I want to be with you. I want to face everything that comes with you. That is what family means, Luca. We do not abandon each other when things get hard." Luca stepped closer, his face tightening with a painful blend of worry and deep-seated anger. "You do not understand the stakes," he said through clenched teeth, his voice barely a rasp. "I lost Catalina. I almost lost Amelia forever. Cannot lose you, too. If something happens to you because of my life, I will not be able to live through it. Then what do you think I feel?" Sophia fired back with the same desperate intensity. "You think I can sit comfortably in Europe while you are here alone facing down people who want to kill you? If something happens to you, Luca, I will not be able to live through it either." They stood facing each other in the center of the room, both breathing hard, both refusing fiercely to give in to the other's fear. This was their first real fight, and it was as fierce and uncompromising as the desperate love they held for each other. Then a tiny, frightened voice cut sharply through the argument. "Daddy, Mom." They both immediately turned and saw Amelia standing uncertainly in the doorway. The little girl wore her favorite bunny pajamas, Bun clutched tightly in her arms, her large brown eyes wide and brimming with fear. She had heard the raised, sharp voices and woken up to find them. "Are Daddy and Mom fighting?" Amelia asked, her voice trembling and small. "Is Mom going to leave? Is Mom going to leave me and Daddy?" Sophia felt a profound, painful heartbreak clench her chest. She rushed immediately to Amelia and dropped to her knees, wrapping the little girl tightly in her arms. "No, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with sudden tears. "Mom is not going anywhere. Mom promises you. Mom will stay right here with you and Daddy. Always." Amelia looked up at her, her eyes wet and tear-filled. "I am scared," she whispered. "I do not want to lose Mom. I do not want to lose Daddy. I want our whole family to stay together forever." Luca stood behind them, watching Sophia holding his daughter, and he felt the last vestiges of his protective anger completely drain away. He had been so terribly wrong. He had thought the best and only way to protect his family was to send them physically far away, to isolate them from his danger. But he had forgotten, catastrophically, that Amelia had already been abandoned once. She could not bear the risk of losing anyone else. And Sophia, the woman who had run once and sworn a solemn oath she would never run again, could not either. He walked to them and knelt down slowly beside them, wrapping his powerful arms around both Sophia and Amelia, pulling them into his embrace. "I am so sorry," he whispered, pressing a kiss into Sophia's hair. "No one is going anywhere. We will stay together. We will face everything, whatever it is, together like a family." The next morning, Dante knocked discreetly on the door of Luca's expansive office, his face grim and grave. "Moretti wants a meeting," he said bluntly, wasting no time on pleasantries. "He sent someone late last night with a specific message. He wants to talk. Just you and him. No men, no witnesses." Luca sat perfectly still for a long moment, weighing the perilous choices in front of him. He could refuse and immediately prepare for all-out war. He had enough loyal men, enough heavy guns, enough black market resources to go up against the Moretti family and potentially win. But war meant certain blood. War meant immediate danger for the people he loved more than life itself. War meant he could lose everything he had only just managed, miraculously, to get back. "What does he want?" Luca asked, his voice low. "He says he wants to negotiate." Dante shrugged, his tension palpable. "He claims it is time the two feuding families ended the generational vendetta." Luca did not fully trust Moretti's sudden claim of goodwill. He knew that in this brutal world, nothing came free. But he also knew, deep down, that sometimes negotiation was the better, safer road than endless war. "Set up the meeting," he ordered. "Neutral ground. I will go alone." Dante wanted desperately to argue against this reckless choice, but Luca's look, the cold steel in his eyes, silenced him immediately. Dante knew that when his boss and brother decided something, nothing in the world could change it. The meeting was swiftly arranged for that very afternoon at a classic Italian restaurant in the precise center of the city, a place that was neutral territory, belonging to neither Benedetti nor Moretti. As Luca drove there, maneuvering his armored vehicle through the busy city streets, he thought of Catalina. He remembered a night not long before she died, when they lay together in bed and talked quietly about the uncertain future. "I worry about you," Catalina had said, her brown eyes fixed on him with a quiet sadness. "I worry this world, this life you lead, will swallow you whole. I worry the hatred and the violence will turn you into someone I no longer recognize, someone who only deals in death." "I will always be me," Luca had answered instantly, firmly. "I promise." Catalina shook her head gently. "Do not promise that," she said. "Promise me something else, Luca. Promise me you will not let hatred completely swallow you. Promise me that when you have a chance, a real chance, to choose peace instead of war, you will choose peace. Choose it for me, for our daughter, for the sake of the future we deserve." Luca had promised, and that promise had been sealed with a tearful kiss. And now, as he stepped into the refined, faintly smelling restaurant and saw Antonio Moretti waiting for him, he remembered that sacred promise. Moretti was a man about 20 years older than Luca, his thinning hair white, his face lined with the deep, tired wrinkles of someone who had lived far too long, fought far too many battles, in the unforgiving underworld. His eyes were sharp and cold, like shards of ice, but there was an unmistakable weariness in them that Luca instantly recognized. the weariness of a man who had fought ruthlessly for too long and was tired of the cost. Benedetti. Moretti nodded curtly in greeting as Luca slid into the seat across from him. Thank you for coming. What do you want? Luca asked, not willing to waste a single second on polite, empty words. Moretti gave a thin, calculated smile. Direct as always. I like that about you, Luca. He leaned forward slowly. I want to end the war between our two families. Why now? Luca asked, his gaze unwavering. We have hated each other for 3 generations. Why do you suddenly want peace today? Because I am old, Moretti admitted, his voice rough. I have lost 2 sons in this senseless war. I do not want to lose anyone else. And I hear you have changed, too. You found your daughter again. You have a woman at your side. You have something fragile to lose now. Luca stayed perfectly silent, watching the older man. He knew Moretti was desperately trying to read him, searching for any sign of strategic weakness, but he also knew that what the man said was brutally true. I propose we divide territory clearly, Luca said, laying out the only terms he would accept. No one crosses into the other's territory. Ever. No war, no more blood spilled. We focus entirely on legitimate business and leave each other absolutely alone. Moretti lifted a single, skeptical eyebrow. You want peace? He let out a harsh, scoffing laugh that was immediately smothered. Luca Benedetti, the most ruthless mafia boss in Chicago, wants peace. You have gotten soft, young man. No, Luca replied, his voice cold, steady, and certain. I have not gotten soft. I simply have something worth more than power to lose. And I will do anything, Moretti, to protect those things, even make a negotiated peace with an old enemy. But do not ever mistake my intention. If you so much as touch one hair on my family's heads, I will burn your entire empire to the ground. Piece by piece. Peace or war. The choice is definitively yours. The 2 men stared at each other across the small table in tight, heavy silence. Then Moretti laughed again, a real, dry laugh this time. You are more like your father than you think, he said, shaking his head. He used to talk to me in exactly the same way. All right, Benedetti. Peace it is. They shook hands, a symbolic gesture sealing a monumental shift, and negotiated the specific terms of the boundary division. When everything was settled and signed, Luca left the restaurant with a strange lightness he had not realized he was missing, a profound relief he had not felt in months. The immediate threat had been handled. His family was, for the moment, safe. He drove home faster than usual, eager to share the unexpected news with Sophia. When he stepped into the mansion's polished foyer, the comforting smell of fresh baked bread immediately filled the air. He followed the scent instinctively to the kitchen and stopped silently in the doorway, taking in the perfect scene in front of him. Sophia and Amelia were in the middle of a chaotic baking project. Both of them had flour dusted all over their faces, hands, and clothes. Amelia was laughing hard while Sophia tried desperately to knead the dough, but it kept sticking everywhere, to the bowl, to her hands, to the counter. Grace stood nearby, shaking her head with a resigned smile on her lips as she tried vainly to clean up the expanding mess. Mom, you are doing it wrong again, Amelia giggled, unable to stop laughing. You have to add the flour little by little. You cannot pour it all in at once, Mom. I know, Sophia laughed with her, a prominent white smudge of flour on her nose. Next time, I promise I will do it right. Daddy is home. Amelia spotted Luca standing quietly in the doorway and squealed with delight, running toward him. Daddy, Mom is terrible at baking. Luca looked at the 2 most important females in his life, their faces dusted with flour, grinning at him like nothing in the world could ever hurt them. And he understood, with a certainty and clarity that settled deep in his bones, that this moment of messy, ordinary joy was why he had chosen peace over power. This was what he was truly fighting to protect. Not power, not territory, not even money. Just this. Just them. That night, after Amelia had been carefully put to bed, Luca led Sophia out into the manicured garden behind the mansion. The full moon, high and bright, cast its ethereal light over the rose bushes currently in bloom, and the air carried the soft, sweet scent of approaching spring. Sophia did not know what Luca was planning. She assumed he wanted to talk in detail about the meeting with Moretti. But when they stopped beside the marble fountain, Luca turned to her with a look she had never witnessed before. It was a compelling blend of worried tension and powerful determination, of residual fear and shining hope. Sophia, he said her name, his voice thick and rough with overwhelming emotion. I am not good with pretty words. I do not know how to make this moment perfect and cinematic the way it looks in those silly movies. I do not even have a ring. I was planning on buying the biggest diamond ring I could find, something flashy. And then I realized you do not need those things. You do not care about money or excessive diamonds. You only care about what is real. He stopped, drew in a deep, fortifying breath, and then he did something the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago had never done in front of anyone, perhaps never done in his life. He went down on one knee. Sophia stood frozen, her heart suddenly pounding a frantic tattoo against her ribs, unable to believe the reality of what she was seeing. Luca Benedetti was kneeling in front of her on the damp grass, his gray eyes shining fiercely in the moonlight, his hand holding hers with a gentle grip. I cannot promise you a perfect life, Sophia, he said, his voice trembling slightly despite his efforts. I cannot promise there will be no hardship, no residual danger. My world is complicated and sometimes it is cruel, but I can promise you I will love you fiercely every single day until my last breath leaves me. I can promise I will protect you and Amelia with everything I have in me, with all my resources. I can give you everything I am, Sophia. My heart, my life, all of it belongs completely to you. He looked up at her, his eyes full of both desperate hope and profound fear. Sophia Bennett, will you be my wife? Sophia looked down at the man kneeling before her. She remembered the very first night she met him at the police station. A shattered, broken father crying because he had finally been reunited with his missing daughter. She remembered the agonizing first weeks at the mansion when he stood patiently outside Amelia's door every night, waiting silently for his daughter to accept him back. She remembered the night he collapsed, utterly exhausted, in her arms behind the station, the first time he let anyone see the depth of his weakness and vulnerability. She remembered all the moments they had shared, evenings talking quietly by the fire, nights soothing Amelia through terrible nightmares, those tentative kisses under the moonlight, and she knew her answer with absolute certainty. But instead of speaking, she did something Luca did not expect. She lowered herself slowly down until she was on her knees with him, both knees planted firmly on the cold ground, her brilliant green eyes meeting his demanding gray ones. I do not need a perfect life, she said, her voice thick with sudden tears, but utterly steady. I do not need diamonds or an expensive, meaningless ring. I only need you, Luca, just you and Amelia. That is absolutely all I need. She took his hand and pressed it to her chest where her heart was hammering joyously. Yes, she said, tears now streaming down her cheeks, washing away the doubt. Yes, I will be your wife. Luca pulled her immediately into his arms and kissed her like his very life depended on the connection, like he had finally found his missing piece. And in that transcendent moment, the whole dangerous world disappeared entirely. There was only them, alone under the moon in the sweet-smelling rose garden. Then a delighted shout rang out clearly from behind them. Mom and Dad are kissing. They turned and saw Amelia standing on the second-floor balcony, Bun Bun held high in her hand, her face glowing with a triumphant smile. She had been secretly watching the entire proceeding from the beginning. We are a family now, right? Amelia called down, her voice ringing with satisfaction. We are a real family now. Luca and Sophia looked at each other, then both laughed, a rich, happy sound. That is right, princess. Luca called back, his voice filled with pride. We are a family. The wedding was held 1 month later in the same beautiful, blooming garden of the mansion. It was a small, intimate ceremony, discreetly managed, with only the closest people in their lives invited. Maggie sat weeping softly in the front row, crying through the entire ceremony into a lace handkerchief. Grace stood beside her, unable to hold back emotional tears as well. Dante stood solemnly behind Luca as best man, the usual hardness in his face softened by a visible, rare smile. Detective Torres was invited, 2. The woman who had helped reunite this fractured family. Sophia wore a simple, elegant white dress, wild roses tucked delicately into her hair, radiant in a way she had never been before. Luca wore an impeccably tailored black suit, but instead of a typical tie, he wore a vibrant bow tie, pink with little bunny patterns, which Amelia had chosen for him because, as she insisted, Daddy has to match Bun Bun. Their vows were not fancy or formal, but every single word was deeply sincere and earnest. Luca vowed to love and protect Sophia until his very last breath. Sophia vowed to stand by Luca in every terrible circumstance, in darkness as well as in light. Amelia was the flower girl, walking down the aisle with a seriousness and pride so great it made every guest smile genuinely. And when the officiant declared them husband and wife and told the groom he could kiss the bride, Amelia could not wait. The little girl squeezed herself immediately between them and wrapped her small arms tightly around both of them. "I want a kiss too," she announced loudly. So instead of a romantic kiss between the bride and groom, it became a loud, joyous group hug filled with infectious laughter and happy tears. The Benedetti family, the three of them finally complete, holding hands beneath the arch of roses with the warm applause of the people who loved them ringing out in celebration. 6 months after the wedding, on a bitterly cold December evening, a black limousine pulled up in front of Romano's. This was the first time Sophia had returned to this familiar place since that fateful, defining night. She had quit her job soon after moving permanently into the Benedetti mansion, finding a new purpose in managing the house and caring for Amelia, and she had never had a reason to come back until now. But today she wanted to be here. She wanted her family to be here with her, in the place where everything changed. They stepped into the small diner with its worn wooden tables, the comforting, greasy smell of pizza drifting warmly out from the kitchen. The place looked exactly the same. Nothing meaningful had changed. The servers were still rushing back and forth with heavy plates in their hands. The customers were still laughing and talking loudly, and the back door still led out to the dark, indifferent alley behind the building. Patricia, the young waitress who had taken Sophia's former place, almost dropped her tray when she saw them walk in. She recognized Sophia right away, even though she looked so drastically different now. No longer the thin, exhausted waitress in scuffed sneakers, Sophia was glowing with deep, settled happiness, wearing a sophisticated red coat that looked undeniably expensive. Her hand was securely linked with a tall, handsome man, and a pretty little girl skipped happily beside them. They chose a table by the window that faced the alley, a silent acknowledgement of their beginning. Amelia sat comfortably between her father and mother, and Bun Bun was placed solemnly on the empty chair beside them, like an honored, silent guest. Amelia had changed profoundly over the past year. Her black curls were glossy now, brushed and neat, treated with care. Her cheeks were full, touched with a healthy, vibrant pink instead of the pale bluish tint of chronic cold and hunger, and her brown eyes. They no longer held shadows, but were bright and filled with a dazzling, fearless light. Eyes that had once been filled with a haunting mix of fear and resignation, now sparkled instead with the sheer, unapologetic joy and playful mischief of a perfectly ordinary, cherished child. "This is exactly where you found me, isn't it?" Amelia asked, tilting her head back to look around the retro diner with innocent curiosity. "Right behind this building? Right?" Sophia nodded, the word barely escaping her. Her throat tightened instantly, a sudden physical clamp of emotion as the memories of that brutal, icy night flooded back. "Yes, sweetheart," she finally managed, her voice thick. "There is an alley behind this diner, and in that darkest alley, I found you." Amelia considered this, her brow furrowed in thought for a long moment. Then she looked up and stated, with a simple, breathtaking casualness, as if she were merely commenting on the weather, "So, this is where our family started." Luca and Sophia locked eyes over the small booth table. Both felt an immediate, overwhelming surge of emotion, tears pricking at their vision, overwhelmed by the simple, undeniable, profound truth distilled in their daughter's words. "That is exactly right, Princess," Luca affirmed, his voice resonating with deep warmth and absolute conviction. This is where our family truly started. They ordered and ate together happily, a portrait of any contented, ordinary family. Amelia chattered animatedly about school, detailing the latest saga involving her teacher and recounting the adventures of her new friends. Luca listened, offering quiet encouragement and thoughtful questions, demonstrating the deep reservoir of patience and unshakable love he had cultivated over the past miraculous year. Sophia simply watched the two of them, her heart so full, so dangerously expansive, that she feared it might actually burst from the sheer pressure of happiness. When the meal was nearly finished, Sophia stood up and announced that she needed to wash her hands. But instead of heading toward the restroom, she moved toward the back of the building. She pushed the heavy, reinforced metal door open with effort and stepped out into the raw, icy air of the service alley. The alley was unchanged. It was the same narrow, dark, cold canyon lined with enormous, graffiti-scarred trash bins pressed against the rough brick wall. Sophia stood there, her gaze fixed on the exact corner where she had discovered the discarded cardboard box almost a year ago. There was no box now, only a blanket of fresh white snow covering the cracked asphalt, and silent, soft flakes drifting lazily down from the unforgiving night sky. She remembered that night with visceral clarity. She remembered the grinding, soul-deep exhaustion after a grueling 16-hour shift. She remembered the faint, pathetic whimper she had heard. A sound so subtle, she had almost convinced herself to ignore it and keep moving. She remembered the bluish, tiny little girl curled inside that improvised shelter, trembling uncontrollably and utterly terrified, clutching a torn, stuffed bunny, Bun, like a lifeline. If she had chosen the front door that night, as she always had, everything would have unfolded differently, tragically. Amelia might have succumbed to the cold, vanishing without a trace. Sophia would still be trapped in that miserable, threadbare apartment, working 16 hours a day, utterly alone and disconnected. And Luca, he might still be searching for his lost daughter, suspended in endless, agonizing hopelessness. Sitting alone night after night, in that carefully preserved pink room, a cold gun sometimes resting in his hand. A warm, heavy hand settled gently on her shoulder. Sophia turned immediately and saw Luca standing right behind her, the collar of his thick coat dusted lightly with fresh snow. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his eyes full of concern. Sophia smiled and nodded, leaning into his touch. "I am just remembering," she whispered. Luca moved to stand beside her, looking out into the grim, frozen confines of the alley. "Thank you," he said, the words catching in his throat. His voice suddenly thick with unshed emotion. "For what?" "For going out the back door that night. The one small choice that changed the entire universe," he clarified. "For not ignoring my daughter's cry. For bringing her home to safety instead of calling the police and simply walking away. For loving her so completely, like she was born of your own body. For loving me no matter who or what I am. For everything, Sophia." Sophia reached out, taking his hand and resting her head against the solid warmth of his shoulder. "Thank you for not giving up," she replied quietly. "Thank you for searching for Amelia for 5 relentless years. Thank you for giving me a family that I never dared to dream of." They stood there in profound silence for a long moment, the snow falling gently around them, dusting their dark clothing. Then a tiny, impatient voice called from behind them, "Daddy, Mom, it is so very cold." They turned immediately and saw Amelia standing in the doorway, Bun held close in her hands, her small face scrunched up from the sudden exposure to the bitter air. But instead of rushing back inside to the warmth, she walked determinedly toward them and squeezed herself tightly between her parents. Sophia wrapped an arm protectively around her from one side, and Luca's strong arm encircled her from the other. The three of them stood rooted there in the middle of the freezing alley, the snow settling softly on their shoulders, yet inexplicably, none of them felt the cold anymore. Amelia lifted Bun high into the air. "Bun wants to say thank you, too," she announced sweetly. "Thank you, Mom, for finding me. Thank you, Dad, for never giving up the search. Thank you, Bun, for staying with me when I was so scared." Luca and Sophia looked at each other over the top of their daughter's head, and they both started to cry, silent tears tracking paths down their cheeks. And then, overwhelmingly beautifully, they began to laugh together. Their laughter echoed brightly through the dark, cold alley, pushing back the lingering shadows and the icy grip of the Chicago winter. Outside, the snow continued its steady descent. The Chicago winter was still as bitter and punishing as it had been last year. But this year, no one had to freeze alone anymore. The little girl who had once carried the deathly blue tint of hypothermia now had rosy cheeks flushed with warmth and health, eyes sparkling brightly with happiness, and her laughter spilling into the narrow alley like a potent reminder that sometimes the greatest miracles begin in the most unexpected shortcuts and dark corners of life. Sophia, Luca, and Emilia's story found its perfect ending here, but the powerful message woven into its fabric would remain long after. It was a message of unconditional, healing love, of the enduring strength found through perseverance, and the necessity of never surrendering hope, even in life's darkest and most desperate circumstances. It was a message proving that family is not defined solely by the people who share your blood, but by the extraordinary people who actively choose to love, protect, and dedicate themselves to you. It was a message that the smallest, most seemingly insignificant decisions, like choosing the back door over the front, have the profound power to rewrite an entire life's trajectory. In real life, we may not face dramatic, life-and-death situations as visceral as the ones depicted in this story. But every single day, we are granted the chance to do something good, to extend kindness to someone in deep need, to offer love, and to be receptive to receiving it. Remember this profound lesson. You never truly know how your one small, seemingly random action might forever change someone's life. If this story touched your heart, stirred your emotions, and reminded you of the power of hope, please press the like button to support our channel and help share this message widely. Please share this video with the people you love so they, too, can hear this moving story of unexpected fate. And do not forget to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you do not miss new videos published every day. How do you feel after hearing Emilia, Sophia, and Luca's journey? Have you ever witnessed or lived through a moment where a small, accidental decision unexpectedly changed the course of your life? Please share your thoughts and deepest feelings in the comments below. We truly want to hear the stories emerging from deep in your heart. We wish everyone watching this video robust health, a life overflowing with joy, and peace in their hearts each day. Remember that no matter how hard life becomes, no matter how isolated you may feel, there is always someone thinking of you and loving you. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next story.